You know, for instance, you're building culture in an organization, right? वो hustle नहीं, you can't hustle culture. Business case क्या हो सकता है? We like वो figure out करेंगे. So one thing I would do differently today to every entrepreneur is like, business case क्या? Every problem you're trying to solve for, put that in place parallelly as you build out the business.
Absolutely.
I had a very, very happy childhood overall, right? And I'm very grateful for that because I think happy childhoods actually give you a lot of resilience for what life has in store going forward, right? Don't invest in anything, just invest in your pure set. Who are you surrounding yourself with every day? Business bura hai, right? But impact karna hai. So, you know, the idea growing up was all about being in non-profit, in like, foundations. That was the idea I grew up with. So where I find myself today is actually very interesting. अगर emotional connect होना, फिर वो logically अपने आप को explain करेगी कि मुझे ये product पसंद है, कि ये app पसंद है, because वो logically justify करने की कोशिश करेंगे. But शुरू होता है emotion. और if you really want to build solid foundations, right? You have to identify what solid foundations are made for you in that particular context, because context will keep on changing, and then figure out उसमें क्या जुगाड़ना पड़ेगा and क्या actually you have to put in that time, put in that effort, put in that energy, right?
110%.
To get to that outcome. So for me, I mean, I'm not honestly a big fan, and I've seen like a lot of like this, you know, India celebrated for being like Jugaad nation and all. I think that's, you know, we need to really introspect and say, how are we building a really rock solid base?
Welcome to the 5th episode of The Lifeboat. This time, I bring another dear friend who has built India's first certified baby-safe organic products for mothers and babies. Let me welcome Naiyya Saggi, founder of BabyChakra and group co-founder of the Glamm group. Naiyya graciously opened her doors to my entire team and me to spend the afternoon speaking her heart out. We discussed a common thread, upbringing in Calcutta, or Kolkata as the new folks say it, how that city shaped her mindset and her character with mettle. We explored her internship days and the hustle for that extra income, especially जब किसी और देश में इंसान हो वो सुलेमानी कीड़ा खुद के entrepreneurship का. And why choose India? More precisely, why choose Mumbai? Or did Mumbai choose her as Karam Bhumi to start BabyChakra? We also delved into discussion relating to the power of simplicity and authenticity, maintaining mental wellness in entrepreneurship, and how motherhood changes the mindset of an entrepreneur, and much, much more. Sit back, enjoy this episode, and keep building one step at a time. देखिए, like कीजिए, share और subscribe कीजिए इस channel को, and let us know what you thought of this episode and what helped you. Welcome to the Lifeboat. Let's dive in. Thank you, Naiyya. Thank you for having me in this beautiful house of yours. Thank you for inviting me over, and personally welcome to the Lifeboat.
Thank you, Vinayak. It's such a pleasure to be part of this, and we'll talk.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to talk. There's so much to talk. So I'll tell you what and why I thought this has a certain amount of importance in all our lives, Naiyya. So why Lifeboat? And you know, you and I were having a chat offline when you asked me why Lifeboat. Yeah. माई पर्सनल बिलीव ये है ना नैया कि हम सब हमारे जर्नी में कहीं ना कहीं किसी न किसी तरीके से डूबते हैं. एंड वी ऑल गॉन थ्रू आवर बैप्टिज्म बाय फायर, वी ऑल गॉन थ्रू दोज मोमेंट्स, वी ऑल गॉन थ्रू दोज बैटल स्कार्स. द सिचुएशन एंड द सर्कमस्टेंस मेक्स अस व्हाट वी आर. बट उस डूबने वाले जो मोमेंट होता है, जो मुहूर्त होता है, उससे बचने के लिए ना व्हाट्स रेलेवेंट इज वेदर वी हैव अ लाइफ बोट, एंड मोर इम्पॉर्टेंटली हु और व्हाट इज इन दैट लाइफ बोट. Now, over the last so many episodes of chatting with such very dear friends of mine, a lot of them are common friends as well, it's come out at different learnings, right? For some people, there are people in the lifeboat. For some people, they are family members. For some people, they are co-founders. For some people, it's the person in the mirror. Because at the end of the day, it's also about the mindset.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is for a lot of our viewers who will perhaps be in that beautiful impressionable age of maybe 24, 25 to 35, 36, 37, where they're forming that trajectory of their life. वो कहानी बना रहे हैं उस टाइम पे ज़िंदगी का, वो कहानी के किरदारों को जोड़ रहे हैं. A lot of them will have a lot of learnings
from amazing achievers like yourself, from people who have shattered the glass ceiling, people who have created a mark for themselves right from scratch, like you, for example. And the learnings that we can take from you and your life for people to hopefully have those as lifeboat moments. So that's the objective of Lifeboat. Tell me, what do you think?
No, so I remember when we had a chat about the construct of the show, right, and of the podcast, I remember being blown away, you know, because these are honestly conversations you have in very select, very deep friend circles, right? These are conversations I would have had like at 2 a.m. in the morning with like a very dear fellow entrepreneur friend of mine, or a very dear like investor friend of mine, like, you know. So I think it's really wonderful, first of all, that you're bringing it out, right? The second thing I was telling you, right, Vinayak, I think it's really symbolic you're doing it in everybody's homes and houses, because I think it's symbolic of the fact that you're actually entering this very personal space. So I love the idea, and I can't wait to see the other episodes, by the way. I'm super excited about those.
They're amazing, and there's so much of heart, because the people there, I love all of them, you know, and the way they've opened up, the way the learnings have come. So I want to now start talking about first your story.
Sure.
And the way I do this, Naiyya, it's not about you, the glamorous you, the famous you, the BabyChakra you, the my glam you. We'll come to all of that later.
Yeah.
We'll come to much earlier of a story. The seed of the thought process of an individual to say कि यार कुछ अलग करना है, कुछ perhaps differentiator बनाना है. How and when does that come into the mindset? You know, that's the thought process that we should first go into. I know that you and I both come from Calcutta.
Yeah.
We have a very interesting common connect.
Yeah.
We literally left Calcutta almost in the same time, maybe a year here and there. I was in Bosco, you were in La Martinia. We have a whole bunch of common friends, but along with that, we also have a very similar and a common mindset that Calcutta teaches you. Somewhat in terms of a lot of empathy, a lot of appreciation, a lot of respect for women, because that's something that comes from the eastern part to a great extent. And that also gives you that confidence to say a lot of things have to be done in a particular manner. So take us back to the Naiyya of Cal, take us back to Naiyya of school. How much of character was built in school? How much of that do you still retain in terms of maybe geography, city, institution? But take us through that mind frame of Naiyya. Take us to that child who today is where she is.
Also, the other thing about Cal is about deep friendships and relationships, right? So, but anyway, so I think just
The adda.
The adda, and like, you know, but you know, I had a very, very happy childhood overall, right? And I'm very grateful for that, because I think happy childhoods actually give you a lot of resilience for what life has in store going forward, right? But just as context, my parents, my mom was in the Bengal cadre. So she's a Punjabi woman, grew up in Amritsar. But she was, you know, when she made it to the IS, they basically gave her the Bengal cadre, and she took this up as a challenge, and she learned Bengali on the go in the districts, you know, as an ADM, then a DM, and then, you know, like living in Calcutta, Maine. And my dad has always been this incredible inspiration, I think, for all the men in my family, but equally, I think, for like a whole generation of seafarers, interestingly enough. So he was in the Merchant Navy, and then he joined the Ministry of Shipping. And because Mama was posted in Bengal, he figured out his first posting in Bengal as well, in the government, right? So yeah, so I think we grew up in Calcutta for the most part, and lived across multiple like government houses, government colonies, right? And colonies mein rehte the, right? So it was like a very, very strong sense of community. Always, right? When Durga Puja ke time, we'd all practice like all the dances, and I was the worst dancer of my lot, but we do all of this. And then, you know, just growing up with those very deep friendships is something that, number one, I think I really, really look back and I remember my time in Calcutta very, very fondly for. The second thing, of course, was all the Buns and all the Mitchells. So literally, my sister and I call her Didi, right? It's a Cal thing, but also generally out of respect. Don't know where that came from. But we'd literally go around when we were like 2, 3, 4 years old in our chaddi banyans and with a plate and a spoon and say, chul bena, you know. And I think that kind of came with some sense of a rebellion. In me, interestingly enough. And I think Cal is a lot of rebellion, a lot of rebellious people.
It gets ingrained at a very early childhood.
Very early age, where you constantly you're kind of imbibing questioning status quo, questioning the government, questioning authority, right? So there's a very strong sense of rebellion I kind of grew up with. And in fact, unfortunately for my parents, I was a very, very rebellious child over time. So I think, anyway, that was the second sort of, I think, very formative piece. The third was actually a very strong skepticism for business, because we came from a service background, and a very strong respect for creating impact in whatever you do in life, right? So it was this very interesting juxtaposition कि business बुरा है, right? But impact करना है. So, you know, the idea growing up was all about being in non-profit, in like, foundations. That was the idea I grew up with. So where I find myself today is actually very interesting.
Very interesting. And it's also gone through the path of its own impact. So we'll
Absolutely.
You know, I smiled when you say that, because we used to have this joke in Cal early days that I think Bengal was the only place where the ruling government called for the Bandh. And we used to laugh about the whole thing, saying that, yaar, arey, ye to bada anokha hai, yaar.
And we used to wait for the Bandhs, right?
We used to wait for the Bandh, right? Because,
and you'd be like,
one extra day off.
Mein, like, aaj kal school hoga ki nahi hoga? Homework karna chahiye ki nahi karna chahiye?
And the gully cricket would come in and all of that. But now tell me, so, and I know Cal creates its own mindset, and every city gives everyone their own mindset. And early stage character development always is about how initial mindset gets formed.
Yeah.
Why I ask this is because mindset to a great extent is everything.
Yeah.
In our journeys of what we have built, created and maybe survived, if I may say, I think mindset was one of the key essences of doing it, and to my interpretation, mindset is one of the key ingredients of also what I call the lifeboat. But here you were growing up and you chose law, similar to what I did. Difference being that I decided to become an entrepreneur within the essence of law. But you, after going to perhaps what would be the most hallowed institution during our times, and I still remember it because those were the places I couldn't qualify there, right? Because I wasn't bright enough as you maybe, and therefore I couldn't get.
I need to tell you some context to that, by the way.
So tell me how law and why law?
No, so let me sort of please demystify some, like I debunk rather these myths that you talk about being bright. So I mentioned, right, and I kind of emphasized I was a very rebellious child. And what that basically translated to, I hated studying. Mm-hmm. I hated studying, right? I loved things like debates and elocution and drama and quizzing and sports and everything, but I hated studying. I could not handle it. So much so that in my class 12th exam, ISC, you know, which is like
it's a big thing.
The big thing, I just refused to go for my accounts exam. I locked myself up in my room and said, I'm not going. My parents actually had to call a locksmith to try and open the door, and then I locked myself in the bathroom. So it was like, oh, I didn't go for my exam, right? So when you talk about me being a great student, let me explain to you, I was not going to have much of a professional journey, but it so happened that law school actually has an entrance exam.
True.
They don't really care about your ISC, ICSE marks.
They don't.
I made it through the entrance exam. Right.
Which also is a very minuscule percentage.
That is true. So
like I didn't, right? I was on the wait list.
And that's okay. But what I'm trying to explain is not because of my marks I made it. Mm-hmm. It was because, you know, maybe I got lucky, but it was something that I knew how to crack that paper. Right? So I made it. And that's how law school actually happened. In fact, like if you ask my mother even today, she'll be like, I do not know. Like she was like, iski to shaadi karni padegi and usko mane kuch aur hi karna padega. Iska koi future hi nahi hai. So I think my mother is the most surprised of the lot as to my journey since then. So, but to cut a long story short, law school was actually a very formative experience for me. So I chose law school, of course, because the admission process was not looking at my ISC marks and my ICSE marks. But I think what I learned in law school was, you know, tab tak in Lamatnia and generally in school, right, you grew up with a lot of unconditional love and a lot of like, these relationships are very deep. Right?
And binary.
And binary.
Non-agenda oriented.
Beautifully said, binary, right? I think law school, I was in the mix of probably the most ambitious peer set, you know, that exists in, and you talked about it, I mean, it was an incredibly ambitious, incredibly driven peer set. But the flip side to it was that they were also ambitious in different angles. So the person who was playing basketball in the college team, super ambitious about his or her journey in basketball, right? Mooting, super ambitious about mooting, right? The moot courts that we used to do, right? Quizzing, another one, right? So it wasn't only about the academic rigor always, right? And I think that stayed with me. High school all that time was always about academic rigor kind of defines you, especially in Calcutta, right? It was all about ki kitne marks aaye. Neighborhoods mein सारी चर्चा यही होती थी कितने marks आए माध्यमिक में कितने marks आए ISC में. Law school में the conversation changed. right? I think that was very, very liberating for me. Now, one flip side that happened in law school, and I've shared the story before, was when I stood for college president. That was a very different angle to law school I saw, because, you know, again, growing up in a girls' school, growing up in Calcutta, where you mentioned, right, women are very equal.
Yeah.
In fact, very, very equal. You know,
In fact, above equal.
above equal in many contexts, right? In law school, when I stood for college president, you know, Vinayak, something very interesting happened, and I'd been like class representative and all the things you need to do, you know, to make it to becoming president. I remember on my Nokia 3310, I used to get these messages saying, you're a girl, you're presentable, stand for vice president, let the boy who's standing against me only be uncontestedly standing for president. And I remember that was the first time in my life, the first time in my life, I faced something as irrational and as gendered as this. Before that, I'd never experienced it. So I think law school taught me a lot, both good and both fairly not so good.
So there are two things you mentioned, and I want to draw specific attention to, because I personally believe that plays a lot in shaping our characters. So like you, while I did not go to a hallowed institution, I went to an institution which allowed me to understand the currency of jugaad very early, the currency of hustle very early. So I came from a background where it was more of middle class, right? And middle class, I've always said, is a beautiful zone. Why? Because it's that ever aspirational cusp. You're not poor, so you're not hopeless. You're definitely not rich. So you're always aspiring to do something better, something more, getting something better. What that builds, therefore, in you is that essence of hunger very early on in life. It's that two-wheeler character trying to aspire for a four-wheeler. So jugaad pehle se aa jata hai. वो hustle पहले से आ जाता है, and I've spoken about this on several occasions where that jugaad took me to get, you know, a job in McDonald's, a job in Pizza Hut, one of the first McDonald's and Pizza that had opened up in Pune. I did a side gig in college. I used to have a business where I used to get 6th, 7th, 8th hand bikes, refurbish it, then sell it to the rich kids and make a reasonable margin there. So it always taught me the essence of jugaad. Another thing that I did in college, very similar to why I was smiling even, you know, earlier when we were chatting, there's a lot of overlap in our life of the way our stories have evolved, right? So I used to be a class rep in school, college. I used to stand up for election. I won quite a few of those. I did everything other than studying. I won debates across every IIT that you can think of. Half of my IIT friends today and who are founders were there during ex-debaters who were there at that point of time. So be it Mudai, Antaragini, all of those. All of them.
Same, by the way.
So, life may realize that there is tremendous value of extracurriculars. There is tremendous value of outside of academics. The reason I ask you is you stressed and emphasized also on this. And the reason I ask you is because a lot of our viewers will be in that age where they are trying to figure out life. They are trying to figure out, is it the structured, regimented, usual way of going about and doing things? Or is it that character over a point of time takes shape about everything in a much more broader base, and ACADS is just one vertical? So take us through your thought on how much did extracurriculars shape you to what you are today, and what's your advice for a lot of our young viewers who might be in that dilemma, saying नहीं यार प्रेशर है, पढ़ाई कर लेते हैं, मार्क्स लाने चाहिए, मार्क्स सब कुछ है, मार्क्स आएगा तो XYZ होगा, XYZ होगा तो ABC होगा. What's the mindset there?
No, I mean, I think it's a very important question, and I think it's a question that for me played out a certain way, and I think everybody obviously makes their own choices, has their own journeys, but I really would encourage people to think beyond marks, right? Because see, if you're looking at what do marks do fundamentally, right? They're basically a way to signal to the world that you are ambitious, that you're intelligent, and you're capable of figuring stuff out. Now, can there be other monikers of that? Right? And honestly, I never did well academically. I mean, like, law school was a little bit better from my academic perspective. I mean, I was doing well actually, but it was not the thing that gave me the opportunities that I experienced later in life, right? Or gave me the formative experience that have shaped me, given me that, you know, resilience ke reservoir jaise hota hai na. I mean, wo academics se to nahi mila tha mujhe, right? So what were the things that really, I think, worked for me? First, I think, you know, college mein काफी time hota hai. So you get a time to like basically step back and say, okay, मेरी goals क्या है, मेरी strengths क्या है, right? And you kind of discover that actually in that journey in college, right? Because till then you're in a very cookie cutter place.
Absolutely.
Suddenly you have that time, you have that flexibility. So 2 or 3 things I realized. One was that I'm actually inherently a very ambitious person. You know, I want to make something of my life. वो मुझे ambition law school में मिला. मुझे उसके पहले ही नहीं था.
Pause here for a second and go granular.
Yeah.
Define ambition for someone.
I'll explain, right?
Because it's so bespoke.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, ambition was key. Ambition to get new experiences, right? Ambition to ensure that I mattered in the world, right? And ambition to ensure that I was able to create impact in the world. These 3 things define ambition for me, right? So I said, okay, now how do I ensure these 3 things happen? So I started looking, of course, at moot courts. I did very well in moot courts, right? So first year I went to Bar Council, did all that stuff. So moot courts was one way to establish, I think, that I mattered in the ecosystem of a law school, right? My marks were where they were, but moot courts mein, you're considered intelligent, you kind of are able to do stuff that's to
We
your
did
strength.
dress-ups, we did KLA, we did
Correct.
GLCs, whole bunch of
GLC,
them.
all of these, right? So moot courts and debates, right? So when we all Asians,
True.
all the other stuff. The second thing I actually did, and I really learned a lot from, was my internships.
True.
And many times people are like, internships mein bas, you know, ऐसे ही chill maro, just get it on your resume, or just only do. I actually never did a corporate law internship, interestingly enough. I did my most favorite internship actually was with the Iraqi Special Tribunal. So I was working with the International Bar Association in London, and the reason I applied to it was because वो 1200 pound दे रहे थे as a scholarship. You could go live in London for 2.5 months. I was living in a youth hostel, obviously.
Still incredible experience.
Incredible experience, and we were charged with training the judges of the Iraqi Special Tribunal who were basically trying Saddam Hussein. And I remember when the judges were flown down to London, we were taken in bulletproof cars in a secret basement room in a hotel where the judges were kept. And I was like maybe not even 20. I don't even remember what my age was, right? I was there and I felt like I mattered because I was part of history. You know, so I think those are the most, so internships, the second thing. And the third thing that I think you did something very interesting with the bikes. I wasn't that cool, yeah. But what I did was I figured out ways to earn money on the side as well. You know, so I would do stuff like, people would give like outsourced drafting. You know, lawyers from Delhi Valley would outsource drafting to a law kid, right? So I do drafting stuff. I'd run a side hustle on campus, which was like a night shop, like a night goodie shop. So I earned a little bit of money because my pocket money kya thi? 3,000 rupees, 4,000 rupees. My sister started earning, so she would send me an extra 1,000 rupees a month, which was like a big thing, right? But I was like, chalo, let me try this out. So I think that was the other thing that gave me a lot of confidence ki agar worst case to wing it in the world, right? Main kar sakti hu.
So what you're not talking about or not outlining is that in a way, all of these that I heard, there is a hidden hustle and a hidden jugaad which was already there.
Yeah.
So now, I want to ask you this because this has really been talked about a lot. I believe jugaad is inherent in us as Indians. वो day one से आ जाता है. पैदाइशी हमारे खून के अंदर जुगाड़ है. But hustle, to a great extent, can be overrated or underestimated. Now, when you give this early example, right, and I'm going to take you back right to this early example that you gave. Take us to what and how, in your mind, the evolution of hustle was. How do you see it later on in life help you out hustle much larger things? Do you believe, like I have a very dear friend of mine who turns around and says, I don't understand hustle. Hard work is hustle. Very simple. The hustle is overrated. I have another friend of mine who says hustle is everything. Hard work is plain vanilla. You're supposed to do hard work. Everybody does hard work. It's that 1% delta what hustle is about. Everyone has a different definition. What's yours?
You know, honestly, I don't really actually believe in jugaad and hustle per se, right? I believe in getting, in thinking big and getting stuff done.
Okay.
Right? And in a way where some things can be done in a way that just need you to get from point A to point B.
Okay.
Right? And that might be the more jugaadu, like, bas fit kar diya, ho gaya, right? And they do it fast, like agility is the need of the hour. And some things are more long term. You know, for instance, you're building culture in an organization, right? Wo hustle, you can't hustle culture.
Obviously.
Correct. So I think.
But to come to culture, perhaps you have to hustle to bring the organization to the sites to where culture actually
So again,
matters.
I think the one learning I've had personally over time, interestingly enough, Vinayak, is that if you really want to build solid foundations, right, you have to identify what solid foundations are made for you in that particular context, because context will keep on changing, and then figure out उसमें क्या जुगाड़ना पड़ेगा and क्या actually you have to put in that time, put in that effort, put in that energy, right? 110%. It needs to get to that outcome. So for me, I mean, I'm not honestly a big fan, and I've seen like a lot of like this, you know, India celebrated for being like Jugaad nation and all. I think that's, you know, we need to really introspect and say, how are we building a really rock solid base from a startup? Like there's too much stuff now happening on governance and these conversations in startups, right? Where did that come from? This whole thing about celebrating hustle, celebrating Jugaad, doing whatever it takes to get to wherever you need to get to. We need to take a step back and say, like, are we building solid foundations? Because when you have solid foundations, you can fly much higher.
And also, we'll come to that because that's a very sensitive and important topic, because also it's about keeping greed in check.
100%.
And greed is directly proportional to success. So we'll come to that because that is a very, very relevant
and by the way, I'm not saying that doesn't mean I'm not agile.
Of course.
It doesn't mean my team is not agile. It doesn't mean we're not speedy. It just means that when we take on things, we identify what things really need speed, and everything does not need speed, or everything does not need immediate, like, just putting things together to make it just work for that particular day.
So structure with agility. Structure with
the
thought.
structure that actually supports agility long term.
See, because as a startup, unless you're nimble, you won't survive.
You won't survive.
You won't survive.
So it has to be structure that actually supports and empowers agility.
Yeah. So now let's take a step back to nostalgia and take another very important chapter of your life. That chapter for a lot of people, Naiyya, might be a dream journey. And that chapter is about an Ivy League, right? You were a part of Harvard Business School. You have been known as an alumni there. You are a very vociferous supporter of some of the fantastic initiatives. But let's first demystify Harvard. A lot of people have this thought to say, यार ये तो अमीरजादों का टंटे है, अमीरजादे ही जा सकते हैं वहाँ पे. एक अलग school of thought है कि boss, you have to be super bright and super intelligent to even crack that. एक third aspect है, which somewhere I heard you mention in some part of the conversation, where you also believe in luck. You also believe in being in the right place at the right time. Take us through a combination of all of this for someone, because a lot of our viewers might be in that juncture where they're really trying to crack an Ivy League, really trying to get into that hallway of a fantastic hallowed institution. How does one get there? How easy is it, Naiyya? And once you go there, like I say this a lot about my friends in IIT and IIMs, the Harvards, the Ivy Leagues perhaps are the greatest equalizer in life. आपको लगता होगा कि यार हमने तो यार मचा दिया, एंट्री कर दिया, हम ही हमें, बाकी सब में पानी कम है. But when you reach that space, you realize that you're a speck in that entire galaxy, because there are 10,000 people far smarter, far more resilient, far wiser than you. And that also is a great equalizer, because it brings you around reality and makes you, I think, far more humbler in life. For me, my humility rounds are much different, it's just taught me. But take us through this for the sake of our viewers who are trying to crack that. How is it? How's life there? How difficult is it? What happens there?
See, I mean, very honestly speaking, it's a great privilege to have had that experience. I'm very, very, very grateful for that experience. But I don't think the experience, like, it's never been like, and I'm going to be very honest here, right? I mean, remember law school, first year, I had like this secret note, you know, कि चलो, you had time to think, ना? College में time मिलता है थोड़ा बहुत, so you're sitting and saying कि क्या कर सकते हैं life के साथ, and like क्या कर सकते हैं, like what is the thing that, and I, you know, I've said, want to go to an Ivy League, and I put Harvard on top. I put Harvard Law School, though I didn't put business school, interestingly enough then, right? Because it was like the dream, like, you know, to go there. And Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and Stanford, like, yeah. And I probably have the notes somewhere still, right? And I said, kaise, and I never really planned it. I think, you know, like I said, I think I've been very lucky. I've had a life of very fortunate, I think, detours. So after law school, right, I had an offer with Clifford Chance in London, like to do corporate law. Never done a corporate law internship, but somehow cracked that interview. And McKinsey had come to campus, and उन्होंने pitch किया था कि you can work in business, right? And I was like, let me try this out. I've never done business stuff before, but try करते हैं. And actually at McKinsey, that is when I think I really appreciated business for itself. I remember till then Calcutta and like law school experience is all about like
the service and the professional
the
line.
service and the professional angle.
Entrepreneurship wasn't even
considered.
Wasn't even cool.
Correct.
Forget anything else. It was supposed to be the negative list.
Exactly. Right? It was a like don't go list, right? It doesn't make any sense. And I think when I saw, when I was working on business problems with my team, but also equally with CEOs and with COOs and like, with like literally across like multiple contexts, I developed a very, very healthy respect for the scale, impact and the outcome companies have, right? And that's when I initially considered ki business school jana chahiye, and that was when the seed of the idea came to mind. And the good thing was, again, you're such a creature of the people, the environment you're with, right? McKinsey made it become normalized, right? That Ivy League is normal.
Before you go down this memory path, take one small pause and tell us, was the McKinsey calling a natural calling or was it a calling out of that intrigueness of trying something very different? I'll tell you why I asked this.
Yeah.
Because it's also again mindset, right? Ki kuch alag karna hai, kuch hatke karna hai, and that hatke always adds tremendous value later on in life, which one doesn't realize. Yeah. So was it because of that, or was it that the brand was calling out and saying?
I didn't even know the brand. Just so you know, see, this is 2007 I'm talking about, right? McKinsey had, I think, entered India about 2002, so 5-6 years in or whatever. I didn't know McKinsey, right? I was going for the free pizza. They had come to the conference room in law school and they said, "Arey, koi free pizza de raha hai, kuch PPT chal raha hai, chalo." So I showed up. And then, of course, everybody there was extremely impressed because that's what consultants do, right? They talk and they do presentations. And I think what appealed to me was, again, I think it went back to saying that they were looking at working with foundations, working with the government, working with healthcare, working in healthcare from a business angle. And that for me was new, right? And मेरे में ये था always, right, कि कुछ नया करना है, नया सीखना है. Like, how do I keep
the hatke mindset?
Correct. And also, do keep in mind, I had a Clifford Chance offer, right? So I reached out to them and said, "Can I defer it?" Once I made it to McKinsey, they said, "You can defer it by a year." So in a way, I had a safety net, right?
That changes the game.
That changed the game. And then I went to McKinsey for a year and I loved it, right? I mean, imagine you're a 23-year-old, you're sitting in a boardroom, presenting and talking one-on-one with like the top CEOs of the country. Right, you're presenting the boards, like publicly listed boards, and it's extremely non-hierarchical a culture, right? McKinsey is very non-hierarchical internally, but also the way we talk to clients, very non-hierarchical.
Whole bunch of my friends keep telling me that.
Right, and I think that is such a powerful formative experience, and then you also realize that no one knows anything. We're all figuring it out together. So anyway, that I think the business ka keeda wahan se shuru hua.
Okay.
And then, I mean, of course, the other good thing is that, and I keep on telling everybody I meet, especially the young folks, right? Don't invest in anything, just invest in your peer set. Who are you surrounding yourself with every day, right? McKinsey normalized for me ambition at a very different scale. Very different scale. They said, Ivy League, sab log to jaate hain, sare BAs, business analysts jaate hain, Ivy League, kuch naya nahi isme, right? So it became normal for me. And then I could reach out to people, I could say, agar main application essays likh rahi hu, to ye story likhu, aise position karu, CV kaise banani hai, right? And then separately, hatke, I also found that I didn't have money, right? I come from a government background, right? So I applied to the Tata Endowment and I applied to Fulbright. Dono ho gaye. So then I could even dream more audaciously ki, it's real. Achievable. I can go there. Practically, I can go there. And that's what happened.
So how was experience there?
Fabulous.
Tell us, there's a beautiful adage that is coming out of what you're saying. And one learning for our viewers is that peer set recalibrates like nothing else, right? Because recalibration is two types. There's a northward recalibration and a southward recalibration. A recalibration northward makes you realize that the unachievable is achievable.
Yeah.
And I think that is also a huge mindset of a founder.
Yeah.
Because all of this, उस time पे हमें नहीं समझ में आ रहा था. But उस time पे लगता था कि यार ये शायद हो सकता है. Like when I was in my, so like for me ना, again, coming from the background that I did, the way I started my career, college mein side gig which I told you, I was earning 20 grand a month. My career at that time,
imagine.
and I'm talking about, this is 2004, 5,
4, 5,
right?
yeah.
And when I started the job, I was getting $1,500 a month. So I'm like, यार reality check कुछ अलग हो रहा है भाई. Side gig is turning out to be more popular. But I'm like, यार bike बेचने के लिए थोड़ी ना career बनाया है यार. But you never know.
Yeah.
But,
maybe second innings, Vinayak, just saying.
Second innings are too many for me right now, man. But what that does, na, it shapes your mindset. Why I keep saying mindset is so important, dude. Because for me, the starting was the bottom of the, I would say literally the bottom of the barrel moment. I started my career in a city like Bombay, and I call Mumbai my Karam Bhumi. Everything that I am is because of what the city has given me, right? I started my journey in this city in a dormitory. I started my journey in a room slightly smaller than your drawing room, with 24 of us sleeping on a gadda niche, with this size house rats going by either side, and having one broken Indian loo to go to. And life ka jugaad tha, usme 24 number pe mat jana. From there, the recalibration what I talk about is, right, recalibration is about achieving the unachievable. For me, the unachievable was at that point of time to go to the number one institute in the country, which at that point of time was the erstwhile Amarchand.
Yeah.
Cracking that, becoming super successful there, going up to almost the position of a junior partner there, building your own name, building your own, clients, books, moving on to another law firm, building a practice, starting your own law firm in the form of Vertices.
How old were you when you started off Vertices?
I was 33, yeah.
So fairly young to start off a law firm as well, huh?
Fairly young.
Because normally you would start off a law firm after you kind of build a book, a client book.
34. Yeah. By 34, I had a reasonable book on my own.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you why and how. That mindset and all kept coming. It'll come a lot in our learnings the way. But what I want to draw out for the viewers here is what you're saying, that the peer set that you hang out with, or even if you don't hang out with, that you subject yourself to, if it's the right element, you can recalibrate northward and say achieve the unachievable. If it's southward, it can actually also be your quicksand.
Absolutely.
So the right choice makes your peer set also a form of lifeboat. Now coming to when a young middle class Punjabi ladki cracks the big boys, cracks Mackenzie, lands up in Harvard. Why I'm again emphasizing a bit on this, because a lot of people want to not know just outside se kitna acha hai. They want to know a little bit of the story inside. Hai na? No one can say it better than someone who's lived it, dreamt it, built it, and successfully evolved out of it. Why do they call the Ivy Leagues the biggest equalizer? What was your experience when you went in? Talk a bit about that. Talk a bit about what's your nostalgia from day one, and how was the course? What did you learn? What's your greatest takeaway?
That I actually love learning. And I love learning in a structured way, academic learning. I had never experienced that till then, right? So that was my biggest takeaway, because I actually did very well academically in Harvard, interestingly enough, which I never anticipated, right? And the reason for that was very, very simple. Every class in Harvard is like a theater.
Okay.
It's like a show. The professor comes in, right? It's a class, so we are a batch of 800 kids.
So that's a large batch.
It's a large batch. And we are, cut into sections of 80 kids each. I was section I. And the professors, and they're world-class professors, right? Some of them are like, they have fan followings of their own as well. They come into the class, they're thoroughly prepared, right? If it's a 7:55 class, they're in at 7:55. They've set up the board, everything. They're starting class dot on time. You're in class, everybody's name card's there. They start it like a show. They'll talk about everything from, entrepreneurship case studies to like biggies, so business, industry, government and the economy case studies. They'll talk about political case studies, everything, right? Venture capital case studies, and they'll present it like a story. It'll be like then it'll evolve into a conversation and then evolve into a debate. And I think the beauty of that entire experience is that you're kind of like, आप जब कहानी सुनते हो, like think about it, right? कहानी आपके मन में रहती है ना?
बिल्कुल, हमेशा.
हमेशा, because stories stick.
Yeah.
So the pedagogy itself is so powerful and so well delivered, right, by this protagonist who's your professor. It is a very, very incredible experience.
It stays on.
The second thing is that in this debate and the conversation, आपको like conversations याद रहेंगे, right? And I am especially a creature of learning from people. So imagine I'm sitting there and we're talking about the Chinese economy. And this is literally a scenario that happens, right? And the Chinese government and the economic decisions that are happening, this is whatever. And on my right is one of my very dear friends who's from China, but her parents grew up as peasants. She's a scholarship kid like me, has a very different perspective to what's happening in China and articulates it freely, without any hindrance, without any censorship. On my right is a kid from one of the billionaire families in China articulating his truth, right? With no censorship, freedom. They both are having a debate.
And diametrically opposite views.
Diametrically opposite views, right? It is being adjudicated and kind of monitored and kind of like
Moderated by the
balanced,
professor.
moderated by the professor. And we have a chance to weigh in on that from an India perspective, a Philippines perspective, a Vietnam perspective, an America perspective. Like my Navy SEAL friend, who's one of the Navy SEAL, right? He's talking from the American like political perspective, right? And that is the debate you're part of. Where do you get that? Right? So that was one experience. The second experience I can talk about is, Harvard is actually an ecosystem. So business school is part of that ecosystem. So you have Harvard Ed School, you have the Kennedy School of Governance, right? You have the Harvard Medical School, the Harvard School of Design. You have all of these amazing schools. And of course you have MIT and you have Tufts and Fletcher's, right? And you're basically in that ecosystem. So literally what I would do in my second year when you had a chance to do electives, I'd run off Harvard undergrad, which is again the brightest kids, right? I'd go sit in some classes there, take those courses. Kennedy School mein classes, right? Design School mein classes. So that way you're exposed to a much broader conversation.
And a world canvas.
And a world canvas. And I think that is unparalleled, So for me, it was just next level.
So I think the currency of exposure in this case is something which I'm sure you brought back and also implemented in your journey to a great extent.
Yeah, no, absolutely
because
I did.
Perspective is
Absolutely
now 360
I did.
degree.
Absolutely I did.
Along with perspective, I think there's also reception of a lot of qualities which people don't understand. Like one of the qualities which I think is extremely important in life to own, possess and have. And I keep saying this, once you're an entrepreneur, Naiyya, we become a lifetime member to a club called the Empathy Club. Whatever we took for granted in our day-to-day lives, you suddenly realize you have so much more empathy for, all the more because you're building it. Perhaps what your experience, and this is what I'm trying to draw out and extrapolate as a learning for the viewers is, because of the world view and because of the world view of diametrically opposite, very deep, very problematic situations for people also, perhaps the empathy as a commodity, as a feeling, as an emotion, increases manifold for people with this kind of an experience. And that's what also adds on into the business. Cut to, when was the moment to say that now I need to come back to India? Because the world's your oyster, right? You've been working in McKinsey, you went to Harvard, post which you could easily continue, do much, much larger, bigger jobs in bigger places. Perhaps have the easiest access to say that, I might as well stay in one of the Western countries and do X, Y, Z there. But that mindset and that calling to say that, no, I need to come back. I need to build something here. A lot of it resonates out of 2-3 things, right? One is a lot in terms of family, how you're built, what family creates for you, what family pulls you on to, the feeling of coming and creating and giving back to your economy, to your society, to your mindset. What was the mindset to say, यार अब हो गया, देख लिया दुनिया, सबका पर्सपेक्टिव भी देख लिया, कुछ शायद बना भी लिया, कुछ शायद उखाड़ भी लिया, अब ना वापस देश में आके कुछ बनाते हैं. So take us through that mindset of a person who wants to come back to the country to actually add value. Does it go back to that, that initial impression of creating impact that was perpetually there in you? Or was it also a situation of maybe destiny, opportunity and vision coming together? Why India? What happened post-Harvard?
So after HBS, I actually got my dream job. My dream job was with Britspan, right? It was like a very, very selective, very coveted job out of HBS because it is actually an impact consulting entity. It's part of Bain.
Yeah.
And they only select, I think, three people from all of HBS for all their offices, right? And I was one of them. So it was like, and I was living in Boston, which is, I love that city. My husband at that point in time, I just was newly married, Sandeep. He actually moved to Boston to be with me. He was at McKinsey.
You guys met at
McKinsey. So he moved to
McKinsey's made a lot of
marriages happen. Yeah. It's
I know a whole bunch of my friends who like all met and
married.
Married in McKinsey.
So anyway, so he moved to Boston to be with me, and honestly, at that point in time, what was happening was while I was loving my job at Britspan and I was doing a lot of work in, like, I was all over, right? I was going to Canada, I was going to Africa, I was going to Australia, I was going everywhere, like, Europe for work. I was always reading up about what's happening at home. and home was that, right? Home was always India.
Yeah.
And you know what stayed in my mind was in all my conversations in HBS and also at Brisbane, also what I was seeing around the world, right? And when I was going back to India, I was seeing this as well. I was seeing this very, very exciting, you know, and I've said this many times, but this whole data, device, digital democracy, right? And I was like, this is very different. Like, ye kuch bada chal raha hai, right? I could feel it, like in my bones. And of course, the newspapers hadn't started talking about startups, what-ups, then the only publication was Shraddha's, right? Your story.
Yeah.
And I was reading that, and I was just seeing that something magical is happening back in India. Kuch to shuru ho raha hai. And I was like, how can I not be part of this? I have to be part of this, right? It's happening in my country, in my economy. It's something which was only going to happen once in a generation. I need to be part of it. And the second thing that like kept me awake, honestly, was, you know, I'd worked in healthcare at McKinsey, right? So I'd worked a lot in maternal and child healthcare. And the more I looked around, I said, you know, there are no digital products, even globally, to solve for the whole problem that a woman faces when she's either expecting a baby or has a child at home, right? And there's nothing that really, you know, is a companion to her in a smart, personalized, relevant way and at scale using technology that can honestly be a game changer for nations. You know, like how mothers and children, their healthcare outcomes are actually nation outcomes, right? So that stayed with me. So one day I just woke up and I remember like I booked my tickets actually back home and I told Sandeep, listen, we're going back to India. And he's like, what? Like what just happened? I was like, yeah, we're going back to India. And he's like, wait, when? Like about like 6 months, 5 months, 3 months? I'm like, 2 weeks from now. He's like, are you mad? Like what about our leaves? What about my job? I'm like, listen, we'll figure it out, right? We're going back. Now is the time to go back. And he was amazing. And he said, okay, now where do you want to go? I said, I don't know, where do you want to go? So we sat and we flipped a coin and we said, okay, between Bombay and Bangalore, the coin landed on Bombay. And we found ourselves in Bombay. Literally, this is the story.
That's insane.
It's insane. And I want to call out, right? It's also from a place of privilege because I had someone who was so incredibly supportive of this with me.
And
right?
that matters.
And that matters, right? So someone who dared to dream as crazily as I did, and that's him. That's my husband, right? So we moved back to Bombay.
And he's a nice guy. I like him.
No,
he's
he's
quite a sane guy in the deals that I've dealt with. And he's a good guy.
He's actually a very, very grounded guy,
very
Vinayak,
nice guy.
which I find very refreshing because, you know, you're right. I think abhi entrepreneurial ecosystem mein bahut ye
एक हो गया है, हवा हो गया है.
हवा हो गया है. He is someone who's very grounded, right? And he has taught me a lot as well. And I have also taught him stuff, right? But what he's taught me is to like go back to the roots.
Yeah.
Be simple, be humble, be grateful.
Grateful, yeah.
So anyway, that's the story of coming back to India.
Why Bombay? Just because the coin fell here?
Literally that.
Okay.
So the other thing, by the way, why Bombay was, and why not Delhi? Because Delhi, if you know, not just because the coin has two sides, but also not Delhi because I wanted to be in a place where I knew I'd be putting in crazy hours. I felt Bombay was a safer city for me to build out of.
Which has been the scene for a while.
100%, you know, Vinayak, you know this well, yeah? I mean,
started my
early
career
days, exactly,
I started
early
my career
days,
in
like
Delhi.
3 a.m., 4 a.m., Kali Pili lekar, you know, ghar aao, right? I mean, you
doesn't
can't
matter.
do that in any other city but Bombay.
You can't do that in any
So the
other
city's been kind to both of us, it looks like.
कुठे आहे? Okay, ready to roll. So for me, I started my career in Delhi.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I
so
started
you
my
were with
career in
AMSS in Delhi?
No, I was in litigation at $1,500 a month in Delhi.
Ah,
And then I was in another law firm in Gurgaon, when Gurgaon was truly a gaon.
yeah.
And then I was in a law firm in Marine Lines, which was for about 6,000 rupees, which tax tooks kaat ke, it was 5,000 something coming in home in hand, and 5,000 rupees mein South Bombay aap chawl mein pahunch jata. So that's how.
But I mean,
then after that it was how much.
But that's the other question I think we should all ask ourselves, right? Why do we pay freshers so poorly in India? I think it is such a tragedy and such a travesty because it's not like any of these people don't have monies to pay.
Especially the large ones because they have, right?
They have. And I think they look at it almost like a favor. Ki they're learning on our time, so it's okay to pay them less. But anyway, that's a separate conversation we can have.
Correct. But ek baat bata now, and I keep saying this, okay? Entrepreneurship is a Suleimani कीड़ा. है तो सोने नहीं देगा, नहीं है तो जागने नहीं देगा. तेरे में था. That is the reason you did what you did. So now let's start with when and how. So see, it's also a sense of realization. वो कीड़ा जो है वो कीड़ा कहीं ना कहीं से निकलता है. मेरे लिए वो कीड़ा literally came out at the time when I was also building my own book, building my own clientele way as a senior associate, right? And you know there's a calling in you at one point of time to say, यार अब ना कुछ खुद का करना है या फिर किसी ऐसे इंसान के साथ जुड़ना है या ऐसे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ जुड़ना है जहाँ पे that sense of entrepreneurship is very high, the sense of ownership, the accountability is very high. When and how was that, you know, that moment, that chutzpah moment for you, that moment to say कि यार अब नहीं तो कभी नहीं. I have come all the way from US, I've landed up in Bombay, I want to do something different. How and when did you realize that there is an entrepreneur inside you? How does, and I ask you this because a lot of our viewers will be of that age where they're in that dilemma. सामने एक सेफ्टी नेट है, सामने एक नौकरी है, सामने महीने के 30 तारीख को उसको पता है वो पगार आने वाला है. एंड इस साइड एक आशा, एक होप, एक एस्पिरेशन है, बट इट्स ऑल्सो ब्लैक होल बिकॉज इट्स अ होल ऑफ 50-50. हो भी सकता है, नहीं भी हो सकता है.
50-50 is putting it very generously.
I'm
but it is the
optimistic.
generous
Yeah.
estimation of what entrepreneurship can be. Huh?
I'm always optimistic. We
No,
are
so
all
am I.
optimistic.
That's why we do what we do.
That's
but
what
I'm
we
just
do.
saying, it's like for
I
the
have a
people
friend
who
of
are
mine,
watching.
yeah, a friend of mine who said a scale of 90-10. So, you know, each one has their own construct. I like to believe it's 50-50. So, coming back to that mindset, तुझे पता कैसे चला that yes, this is the moment that I need to go across and give into my calling? Was that the moment of the birth of BabyChakra? How did that idea formulate? More importantly, why I ask you is because for a lot of our viewers to know what is the mindset of an entrepreneur. When does a person know that safety net ho na ho farak nahi padta, the calling is too real, the calling is too deep and you have to give in to the calling? What were the thoughts around that? Tell us a bit about that mindset. Tell us a bit about the zone that you were in at that time.
It's beautiful, I think, the term you use, calling, because I really resonate with that term actually. And I think it is what it is. Like, I think entrepreneurship is a calling. Not everybody should and can be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because everybody can't be an entrepreneur anyway, and it should not be also.
Absolutely.
You know, but for me, I think if I look back and I want to call out, I think two distinct periods in my life, right? One is Entrepreneur 1.0 with BabyChakra and Entrepreneur 2.0 now with Glamm.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to talk about a little bit of a difference between the two, right? That I've seen evolve
100%.
in my journey.
And
as
I
well.
will come into detail about it
Of
also.
course. But since you asked,
Yeah.
right? I think Entrepreneur 1.0 is, you know, Naiyya, very, very driven by building something that would be at scale, that would impact a ton of, impact lives at scale. You know, also very inspired by the fact, and, you know, this is where I had gone through very, I would say very difficult internal struggle to arrive at that point.
Talk
where,
about it.
I'll tell you. So, you know, at business school, while I was there at business school, and I'd seen, of course, the impact businesses can have, but I was always very confused कि business school के बाद क्या करना है, non-profit join करना है या social impact consultancy join करनी है या business खोलना है, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's when I was talking to friends in business school and post and back in India, you know, I think one thing that stood out was like, what is this one thing that's being done recently that's created the most impact in people's life? And the answer to that was actually Airtel at that point in time, right? Because everybody was, you know, doing business, having access, having aspiration, set through fundamentally what's a for-profit company. And the company was not set up to have social impact, but because India is such a land of opportunity that aap jo bhi karo, it actually has a disproportionate impact on people's lives.
True.
So I think that was a very big, I think, internal struggle I went through, honestly, Vinayak, to even decide to do a for-profit company, right? When I was building out BabyChakra. I think the other, struggle I also went through, it wasn't as big though, from my family. So my Nana, who's no more, you know, he basically didn't talk to me for about 2 months.
Why is that?
Because he basically said...
Can you pass me that cushion?
Yeah, I'm
please?
going to pass it to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
He basically thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
He was like, you know, finally, इस लड़की का कुछ हो रहा है. Right, I told you, I was quite a lost, no hope child growing up. So he was like, finally, like, you know, she's gotten like an amazing education.
And there's a career trajectory according to him.
Career trajectory as per him, right? And, you know, honestly, think about it, right? My family's actually been through a lot, right? So my Nana was ex-army. Retirement pension was not much, right? So he's seen some really hard times as well financially, right? So he was like, financial stability milti hai from doing a job, right?
I'm just finding it so funny that look at the overlaps. Calcutta became an overlap. Law school became an overlap. And now the fact that even my Nana is ex-army is just going crazy in terms of our overlaps.
I mean, so you totally, I think,
know
the situation I'm talking
crazy,
about,
crazy
right?
situation.
So larger than life personality in the house, basically having an opinion. I mean, but that was like very short-lived. I mean, 2 months.
And my father-in-law was also ex-army.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
He's a commanding officer of 10 engineers.
Wow.
So yeah.
So you've, my God, I
I've faced
can't imagine the courtship period there, no?
I've faced the bayonet in different forms in my house. But yeah.
Yeah.
How does that calling happen? Tell me a bit about that calling that came in your mind, because entrepreneurship is about calling, right? You felt very strongly about a need.
Yeah.
A lot of times people would say कि यार ये need तभी इंसान के दिमाग में आता है when a person experiences that problem. At that point of time, you were not yet in motherhood.
No.
But you still had a calling to say that this is really a practical problem that needs solution. Perhaps one of the reasons that problem's empathy towards understanding that problem also accelerated because you were dealing with healthcare in McKinsey.
Yeah.
Right? But India is very different. India market is very different. India consumer mindset is very different. So थोड़ा सा हमें ये बता कि when did you know that yes, this is what I want to do, and start by talking about the shaping of the idea, because a lot of times what happens, and for our viewers Naiyya, ideation and implementation में ज़मीन आसमान का फर्क होता है.
Correct.
Great ideas, unless they are implemented, are useless.
Correct.
But decent ideas, if they are implemented in an excellent manner, can become a great product, a great vision. So take us through that ideation to the implementation stage of BabyChakra.
No, so and I fully agree, by the way. I mean, I'm all for like, you know, when people ask me, you know, idea versus like operations, I'm like, listen, it's toughest being a strong operator and getting stuff done, right? I actually did my, at McKinsey, right? I was working in maternal and child health in India. So I was working with the Gates Foundation at that point in time, and we were building out the maternal and child health nutrition strategy for like from Bihar, but to scale it across India.
Okay.
And I think two observations I had, right, Vinayak, which were very, very potent for me. One was that, you know, if you look at the best communities in terms of health outcomes, right, in villages at that point in time, right, it's communities where there is actually a community of care, right? So where mothers have formed mom groups, where the doctor from the public PHC or the Asha worker, the Anganwadi worker comes in at the right time, offers advice and takes measures things in a very non-judgmental way, where the family gets involved in the care protocols, right? So ये मुझे community की जो feel है ना, and the power of community, especially in healthcare outcomes, I think it became very evident to me through that period in time. The second thing I think I took away from that experience was also the power of personalized care, right? Because every mother is different. Every journey is different. Every child is different. If you can't give the same cookie cutter advice to a mother and expect the same outcomes to happen, right? So what I would see there is, of course, it requires massive human intervention, right? Where you're giving you're trying to understand data, giving very painstaking information. And what stayed with me was, is there a way to scale this and create hyper-personalized, hyper-relevant, experiences through digital platforms? So I think that was, the seed of the idea of BabyChakra. And of course, then the power you see, right? I mean, like even on the ground, right, in multiple villages and communities, you can see the community, like you just see the outcomes, the children are healthier, there's a future generation that's completely transformed its life. We have like cases of like stunting, undernutrition, so many cases. And they are very, very easily solvable, right, through the right information. So anyway, that was like, I think just became like a complete kida for me. I think what I probably would do a little bit differently is that I was very, very driven by impact and very driven by change and scale and all that happened. I don't think I ever really thought about the business case kya ho sakta hai. I was like, wo figure out karenge. So one thing I would do differently today to every entrepreneur is like, business case kya hai for every problem you're trying to solve for. Put that in place parallelly as you build out the business.
Absolutely.
That's of
business
course
without a
learning.
business case beyond a point is...
It's just difficult to build out on its own, right? And
it's a great idea with emotion, but tangibility is also in the business case.
Correct. And I think, of course, we figure out the business case of it, right? Over time. But I think we could have done that much earlier in our journey.
One part, again, why BabyChakra? Why the name? I'll tell you why, because again, I like asking these random questions because it seems random, but reality में there's so much of depth in each of these things, because बहुत सारे लोगों को शायद ये नहीं पता होता है कि at times the name can change the game, especially when you're consumer facing. A lot of people don't understand the power behind a catchy phrase or a catchy name or a simplistic name or something which can resonate and stay on in the mind, right? एक entrepreneur जब नाम choose करता है अपना business के लिए, it's like choosing the name for his or her own child. Rational होता है, thought होता है. What was the thought behind this name and why BabyChakra?
I mean, part of it was that we said ki, you know, it should be a name that has a term baby in it. So it's immediately clear ki this is with moms and babies, right? And we looked up a whole lot of domain names. Kuch available hi nahi tha. We tried all these fancy names, baby, butler, baby son. And then I was like, you know what, this is not authentic to what we're building out. Right? We're building out what is being built in India, right? Talks about a circle of care we're trying to create, right? And something that maybe, God willing, over time actually becomes a global phenomenon. Right? So what is that one thing that transcends? And in fact, it was, I think, my mother who came in and said, Chakra, you know, and it just like, that point in time I had a co-founder, Mitesh, we just immediately said, okay, Chakra, and wo domain available tha, right? So we literally just arrived at BabyChakra like through a very, I think, through a brainstorming effort.
And serendipity.
And serendipity. And even the logo, this is still the same logo, right? We were just drawing out with like chakra and we drew out this circle because it was a circle of care. And we said, what is in this circle of care? What's in this warm embrace? And we said a mother's heart. And we drew a heart. And it's as simple. It's a very, very, very simple logo. It's made by us, right? It's not like
but
done by
with
some
the
branding
original
agency.
thought and warmth and love.
Correct. And you're right. I think the simplest things have resonated so deeply. You know, we've gotten over periods of time, and even today we've gotten cakes sent in by mothers, you know, when the children are born in the BabyChakra shape, in the logo shape. We've had BabyChakra, you know, mothers stitch, crochet, BabyChakra hearts on their baby's first onesie
how
and send us
beautiful.
photos.
How beautiful.
So it's a very simple thing, right?
But it
it's
sticks
real,
on.
It sticks on.
Sticks on. So a lot of takeaway for people there is to understand that simplicity at times is the biggest weapon that you can use.
Correct. Simplicity and authenticity.
Always.
You know, because agar aap authentic ho, if you're really
You know,
putting,
can I say something?
Yeah.
I don't think you can be simple without being authentic. I think you can be complicated without being authentic, but you can't be simple without being authentic. I think simplicity and authenticity go hand in hand.
Potentially, and I think I hear you. Listen, I'm not going to argue with a lawyer. इतना तो मैंने सीख लिया कि lawyers के साथ कभी argue नहीं करते.
I'm a very non-lawyer lawyer, but you know the mindset is about. I agree, and I think what the takeaway for a lot of people here should be that when you're building something, focus on those micros as well, because macros में बहुत लोग खो जाते हैं, but micros stick on and stay on, and this is a micro. Your name, your logo, the beauty, the simplicity, the way it can resonate. Those are micros that you have to focus on.
And I think the emotion. So, you know, I was sharing with you earlier, right? I mean, as consumers and as people in general, we justify emotional decisions with logic.
Yeah.
Now, when you see something as, I mean, what conveys emotion, or a name that conveys emotion, or a simple logo that you immediately see and you get it, you know, heart to sabko samajh aata hai, like, they understand. अगर emotional connect हो ना, फिर वो logically अपने आप को explain करेगी कि मुझे ये product पसंद है, कि ये app पसंद है, because वो logically justify करने की कोशिश करेंगे. But शुरू होता है emotion से.
Always, everything starts with that seed. So I'm going to go through a few peaks and valleys for you now.
Absolutely.
Like life, and like our journey as, you know, entrepreneurs and as founders. You started a company, you built it, you raised capital, you took it to a particular level, and then from there onwards, you also came to terms with a beautiful moment to say that at times it's not just about building alone. Perhaps it's also about housing it in the right platform and the right house for it to be able to exponentially grow.
Correct.
Because at times the ecosystem can be a catalyst, it can be a springboard, but a lot of this comes with maturity, Naiyya. And why I say maturity? यार entrepreneur के लिए ना अपना उसका जो company बोलो, venture बोलो, it's his or her baby. There is always this you know, parting depression that is there. Like you know, as parents we feel it, and mothers feel it so much more. Entrepreneurs also feel it. But that maturity to understand and say that 1 + 1 is not 2. 1 + 1 can be 11 or maybe 111. You never know how the power of, you know, expanding in that manner. So I want to now go into this mindset. First and foremost, my question to you, because a lot of people are in that mindset, hopefully, where they are talking about their first term sheet. They are talking about the first external capital. They are talking about the first partner that can be there on the cap table who they have not known or understood earlier. So take us through your learnings of a fundraising journey. A lot of people, Naiyya, and I keep saying this, tangible capital से 10 गुना ज़्यादा matter करता है intangible capital. And intangible capital is a whole bunch of things. It's not just about the person who's writing the check. It's a lot of things that the person brings on the cap table. A lot of people don't understand the value of intangible capital. कभी कभार बहुत interesting situations भी होते हैं. That there's a great name with intangible capital, but is squeezing down the valuation by 10 bips. There may not be that great a name, but has no intangible value or intangible capital. It's only about the check and perhaps giving you 10 bips or 20 bips higher. At times, a founder on short-sightedness on the value at that point of time completely discounts what intangible capital could be, and later on realizes that the check was not the right check to take. So take us through a little bit of your learning. But for our viewers who are in that journey of raising capital, meeting the right investors, deciding between term sheet A, B, C, what's the value of intangible capital? How does one know who's the right partner to have on the cap table?
I mean, a very practical answer to that is actually talk to fellow founders who've had them, the investors invest in them earlier. I mean, that again, I talk about the power of peer networks and the power of peer learning, right? I mean, I'm a creature of peer learning. I learn through conversations and I learn through people's experiences, right? Because no book will be able to capture some of these behind the scenes conversations, right?
Or the behind the scenes situations.
Exactly. And that's where I think it's super important that you constantly make the effort to build deep friendships and relationships with people who you respect, one, but also who are going through a similar life experience as you. You know, and so for me, I think, I mean, of course, and I was, you know, starting off as a new founder, I didn't know too many people. I've built my relationships over time. And I made my mistakes as a result, right?
And we are supposed to make mistakes.
We're supposed to make mistakes, yeah. I mean, that's part of life. So I think the first thing is that do your ref checks, right? Talk to people, portfolio company founders, ideally friends of yours who are portfolio company founders, and say, what has your experience been with this particular investor, right? Number two, trust your gut. Many times, you know, of course, you're being like, it's a bit of a, if you're really in demand as a venture as well, you know, there'll be a lot of sweet talking, right?
A lot of courtship.
A lot of courtship, right? Yeah. But I think use your gut, you know, ask some of the questions in terms of what has been the company that's not succeeded for you, for instance. Ask that question to the investor. So what did you do with it? What happened to the founder? Understand from the investor's body language how they treat failures as well in their portfolio, how they address it. Many times we don't ask questions to the investor. We are only being asked the questions. Correct. And we are okay with that status quo because we think the power dynamic is imbalanced.
And we are mentally calibrated to say that they are the ones who are going to ask the questions.
Correct. Spot on, right? Ask your questions gently, but ask your questions and figure it out, and you will get a very good read of whether that's the right partner for you. Because, you know, honestly, no one has a smooth journey. Everybody has like journeys where the chips are really down, and then you're looking at that partner and saying, how is that partner dealing with you, right? Something I have learned over time. I think also thirdly, I mean, obviously look at the other practical stuff like the fund size, the fund lifetime, the fund thesis, the fund motivations, the partner motivations. Are they here, new fund, different motivations, right? To establish themselves, to prove a certain ROI versus a more established, seasoned, you know, investor who basically is investing for a different reason maybe, right? So I think these are the three things that you should look at as a new entrepreneur. Yeah. To really understand whether that's a right check for you or not. Because otherwise everything else is noise.
See, the power of asking questions is underestimated.
Yeah.
And a lot of times soft diligence is also underestimated. Yeah. Like you said, you know, what's beautiful as a takeaway is how an investor deals with failure for a portfolio also showcases character of that investor. The other bit which I think is also very important is like what you stated. With fellow founders, when you start asking, you'll also realize that is it, you know, something was beautifully said in another episode where even for an investor to go across and give you that shoulder where you can just rant because things are not going down, and the investor at the end says, don't worry, sab theek ho jayega. That sab theek ho jayega kehne ka maturity at the right time for an investor is also a phenomenal intangible. It's not just about opening the doors, it's not just about bringing customers in, giving you more access. It's about being there as your lifeboat when chips are down, because there are two mindsets, right? When chips are down, you can get flogged and that makes you feel that much more bad, or you can have a shoulder where the investor says, "ठीक है यार, हो जाएगा, we'll manage it." That "ठीक है यार, we हो जाएगा," they underestimate the power of that. I think that's a very important message that you're giving out.
Yeah.
When you build something successfully, it takes immense amount of maturity to know that yes, this is the reach or the level where I have brought it up to. Now I want to reach the moon, I want to take it to the XYZ next level, and this is the catalyst that can, or this is the springboard that can. Having said that, why maturity? Suddenly your baby is no more your baby.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're a part of a larger consortium.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, you have your skin in the game, you have your stake, you have your P&L, you manage, but you are now going to be a part of a larger group, larger
Correct.
protocols, larger thought processes. How does the founder know that this is the right moment to move to a larger ship? How does a partner deal with that depression or that mindset of separation anxiety of saying my baby is now going to a larger home and I suddenly become maybe a part of a larger ecosystem? Take us through that mindset, because a lot of our viewers might also face that conundrum. They may say, यार शायद ये acquisition sense बनेगा, शायद ये merger sense बनेगा, शायद housing myself in this sense बनेगा, but XYZ reason का clarity नहीं है, so I'm very scared. Or a great opportunity because of prejudices, because of views, because of noise can be missed out because people have not got that education. You've been a part of a very successful merger, very successful group acquisition, part of a group. Take us through that journey.
You know, so part of it is, I mean, obviously, if you like go back to that time, right? And I was sharing with you, right? It's been covered in a Harvard Business School case study. So I actually spent a lot of time with my professor of entrepreneurship, Professor Shikhar Ghosh, introspecting to what led to that merger to happen, right? And I think there was a couple of, I think even, because when you're going through the merger, you're just going through it, right? You don't even like, you don't have time to step back. And I think the case study process gave me time to step back. So I'm a little bit more clearer now. So I'll lay out the 3 reasons, right, that the decision happened, right? And honestly, I don't think I'm the most mature person in the world, Vinayak. I think it's a function of these three things, right? One is, you know, the circumstances that we were operating in, right? This is, you know, think back to 2020, which is when COVID
was just taking shape.
Right? We had 2 term sheets when we kicked off 2020, and I was like, wow, we're going to kill it this year. We're going to be amazing. And both those term sheets
overnight
went away.
Disappeared.
And I remember the first term sheet that I was, and it was an SHA process actually. Term sheet, it was like proper, like it was
documentation
documentations are going on, right? And you know, even to like get consensus in the term sheet takes so much time, right? So imagine before that was like a 9-month process, if you will, right, of cultivating those deals. When it went away, I remember it was a different house. My knees buckled. I got the call. My knees buckled. I fell down. Because it was in the start of the pandemic. We had, I think, 5 to 6 months of cash left in the bank at best. टीम को मैंने बोल कर रखा था कि अरे पैसे आ रहे हैं, don't worry, अभी और बड़ा करेंगे, ये करेंगे, right? And the call came. So I remember that whole day. I just, and I've not actually dealt with. I mean, I've dealt with grief in terms of loss. It was almost at that level of grief. So anyway, I want to just share that. I mean, it's not all hunky-dory always, right?
It's never hunky-dory.
And then, of course, started the whole process of saying, okay, now what next? What's next? And I think that's the one thing I would credit about myself. I know how to get myself up from these
bottom of the barrel
moments. I know how to make it happen. I'm like, this can't be it. This is not the end of my story.
But that's
right?
again the power of mindset, Naiyya.
Yes, and maybe it's a function of all the formative experience we've had. But anyway,
mindset is because of that.
Exactly. So I slept through that night. I mean, I didn't sleep, but whatever little sleep I had. And next day I said, अब करना है कुछ, अब कुछ नया करना है, कुछ नया देखना है. Like, you know, how do we make this work, right? It has to work.
Yeah.
It can't stop here.
True.
And so I went and talked to my internal investors, and I figured out another term sheet from a mix of external, so a US-based fund, and my internal investors. Of course, that was a very, very, I think, a very fraught negotiation, because it also required a certain kind of recapitalization and a certain kind of a conversation, right? And that took me another like 9-10 months extra, like beyond that. Now you ask how we survived. We survived because we launched 3 products in the meantime, 3 BabyChakra physical products, consumer products, which were had been co-created by a community of mothers and doctors. We launched them on Amazon, right? And they became bestsellers. They became such insane bestsellers that actually Amazon blocked us after the first 3 days of us launching it. They said, "Kuch jhol chal raha hai isme." Can't be this kind of traction we've never seen before. Newly launched like a baby care product, right? And that monies, right, actually kept us going for an additional couple of like 5 to 6 months, right? Otherwise we wouldn't have survived.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that term sheet came in, and then we were negotiating that, and that took forever. And then Darpan reached out to me and said that, and I'll tell you about that story separately. So that was one piece, right? So circumstances, right? The second piece is, I think, you're thinking about what's the right answer for the business to grow, right? Yes, I'm emotional about my business and I have every right to be, but at some times you have to think about what is the right answer for the business, and what's the right answer for the team, and what's the right answer for the mission. And absolutely, like you said, right, I think when Darpan and I chatted, I mean, it felt gut-wise, right? It's the right answer, because बहुत times, again, I said, emotion, logic, you could look at all the numbers and the financials and everything else, and it's a great deal or whatever else, but I think it just felt right when he described to me his vision and my shared vision of how content and communities can drive commerce, and how do we do it across multiple contexts, including a baby care range, right? And that stayed with me. So I think the second piece was the context in the incoming company also felt right, right? The founder to founder wavelength match, right? And the third piece to it was that, honestly, speed of decision making. And it's true. I told the board, and the discussions were taking forever. These are big decisions to take, right?
Massive ones.
And finally, thanks to Arihant, actually, Arihant Patni, who was one of my investors, he basically, I said, how do we solve this, Arihant? I need your help. He said, Naiyya, let's just make it an objective criteria. First of all, you take a decision. So I was like, that's not objective. If I'm taking a decision, that's not objective, because there's incentives both ways, right? I said, the most objective criteria I can take is what deal closes fastest. And that's what we went back to the shareholders with. And then Darpan's deal closed fastest, and we moved ahead with my Glamm.
So there's this one more part about your life which not many people know. I'm privileged to know a bit about it as a friend, but it's also great learning for our viewers, right? And I want to marry these two thoughts. There was a time when you started your entrepreneurial journey, and you started as 2 founders, and then in a very nascent stage of your journey, it turned into becoming a solo founder. I'm not going to bring in the gender card here, because for me a founder is a founder, even though India has various thoughts around it, and I'm sure you've faced enough issues around it that way. But imagine, and this is the mindset I want to understand, from starting with someone, suddenly overnight becoming a solo founder, from there to where you move into a different avatar, and now you have multiple co-founders heading different verticals. What is the learning? What is the thought process of dealing with that sudden moment of feeling alone? Because there was a vision, there was a thought process, idea was for 2 people to build it, and suddenly you're all alone and you have to build it, and it can be scary. People don't want to acknowledge this, even though they talk about it. It's not just about the loneliness of our journey. I think, Naiyya, it also impacts mental wellness to a great extent at that. Because besides loneliness, it's also the thought process कि आप चिल्ला के किसको बोलोगे, कहाँ बोलोगे. हर दिन हमारे ज़िंदगी में रायता फैलता है, हर दिन भसड़ है, हर दिन we are fighting a new fire and we have to douse it, है ना? People underestimate the requirement of that shoulder. You had it, and then you were alone, and then you moved into a journey where you have multiple. Take us through a mindset of a founder in running a journey, getting into this situation and suddenly becoming a solo founder, and then when you move to a situation where you have 4-5 co-founders now to rely on, to fight together.
2 other ones, Darpan and Priyanka, that's it.
When you have 2 other co-founders to rely on, and therefore to that extent have a larger or broader base of comfort, if I may say so. Tell us a bit from our viewers' perspective of how does one deal with this?
No, so I think you've put it beautifully, and see, Mitesh is actually still a very, very dear friend. He was one of my best friends from high school, right? So when he, to his credit, he was always very, very transparent about whatever he was undergoing. So I think what I'm very grateful for is that he was honest, you know, and, you know, he'd just gotten married. Our company, we were just starting off. We didn't have that much money, you know. We were probably just gotten our first round of angel funding. There wasn't that much money in the system. There was not enough to, we weren't getting a salary, right? And honestly, while we glamorize entrepreneurship, there's some practical choices people make. And it was the right choice for him. I still think so, right? Because if he'd continued, he would have not had any money to support the family, right? But what that left me with, I think, is exactly what you said. I mean, I was one of my, again, lowest lows, right? And I was like, ye mere se ho paega ki nahi? And please cut back.
Self-doubt.
Yeah, I mean, what will happen, right? You know, and I think it was a mixed blessing, if I really look back, because you know, how they say, right? You become like, it's like iron, right? You become tougher when you're on fire. I think it made me very
Baptism by fire.
Baptism by fire. You become.
इसमें हिंदी में कहावत है, सोना कुंदन आग से तप के ही बनता है.
हाँ, there you go. So you get it. Pressure makes diamonds is the other way to put it, right? So I think that's what happened with me. I mean, I really pressure बहुत आया. I mean, like I was I literally, except for the last maybe 5 months, before this, for the last 8.5 years, I don't think I've slept a full night's sleep. I just haven't. And that is genuinely the reality of what my experience has been.
And this journey.
And this journey. And there's always something that's keeping you awake. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I fully, by the way, and I talk a lot about it now, the mental health issue.
Yeah.
You know, so many of us founders talk about it openly now amongst each other.
Yeah.
Right? Where we talk about just the strain and the stress of entrepreneurship. And I think the fact that we need to really talk more about how to get support for those periods in life where you suddenly feel ki there's no future.
And there's no stigma in that support. I've had founders come in my show and actually own up and state that they actually go to a therapy or a therapist, they undergo therapy because perhaps for them the biggest way of someone hearing them out without judging them is that one little zone.
Bilkul.
Because otherwise everywhere they're getting judged.
Correct. And I think the way to think about it is also that, you know, you as an entrepreneur, right? And I think about my team as a sports team. I've said this before, I don't think of my team as family and all that. No, that's nonsense. I don't know, India mein bahut bolte hain, meri family, meri team. No, that's nonsense. I mean, like, they're all individuals. They have their own personal aspirations, professional aspirations. They will leave the fold and go, and more power to them, you know, or they will stay here and they will find success.
And so more will come.
More will come.
Yeah.
So it's a sports team, and I think our responsibility is to ourselves and to our team to ensure we all play to peak potential. A big part of peak potential is mental health. Right? So it's not just, I think, the right thing to do, which it is 100%, to seek help, to seek coaching, to seek therapy.
Yeah.
It's also the most practical thing to do if you want to play to peak potential as an entrepreneur and play the long game.
True.
So I see no reason why we should anytime judge anybody. I think it's a practical choice to seek mental health coaching or therapy, to seek leadership coaching. In many cases, I mean, many of us now, I'm actively scouting for a leadership coach. Right? Because I know that there's more reservoir of leadership to unlock even within me. Right? Now, how do I unlock that? I need to talk to someone who's trained, who's professional, who understands how this is done.
And who can give you that ladder to go to the
Correct. So I think it's a practical choice in many ways.
In your lowest low, did you ever consider therapy?
I did. I actually, you know, that was again the peak of COVID, right? When I mentioned that the term sheets and all fell through. I actually went online to seek coaching. Right? And you're so right. I mean, the whole fear of judgment, because, I mean, obviously we're fairly visible, right, as a founder. So I remember doing this video chat with someone on one of these mental health platforms.
With the mask on?
No, I didn't do my mask on, yeah. First I did my camera off.
I know someone with a mask on. Someone with a mask on.
No, so then eventually, I mean, I changed my name, right? So, you know, I changed my name on the video chat, and then later I was like, what the hell was I doing? I can't be authentic if I'm even changing my name in this conversation. So the next chat I did, it was with a different therapist, because they allocate like different people to you sometimes. It was with someone, and it was like I gave my name and I said, I'm going through this problem statement, and we had a very open, transparent conversation.
Acceptance is key. You know, and the fact that so many times people don't understand that acceptance is also a lifeboat.
True, and I think and beautifully said, and I think acceptance and acknowledgement that you need help, and the only person that can help you is you yourself.
The person in the mirror.
till then it was always like a lot of also, it actually makes things worse, right? Because when you're looking at, I look like for instance my husband, or I looked at my team members, or I looked at my invest, I was like, why aren't you able to understand what I'm going through? And who can understand that?
And it's so unfair on them.
It's
because
so unfair on
you're
them.
loading on further
Correct.
aspects of
it's actually destroying
actionables are
those
there.
relationships further, right? Because
Absolutely.
you're basically saying that you should know what I am feeling when you can't articulate enough, and you will never be able to articulate enough because there's a myriad of emotions going in your head, right?
See, even if you do, I think our family's responsibility is always to try and act as the people to try and pull you out from drowning. But it's also unfair for us to put them through that.
Correct.
Because that's not their expertise. They're doing it out of love.
Correct.
And at times, and I don't know whether you ever said this out publicly or you're saying it out, but this is what Lifeboat is all about. Talking about moments which are so true that people, our viewers, realize that achievers are not achievers just because of X, Y, Z. They are achievers because they go through the truth. And that's what life is about, right?
Yeah.
That's what Lifeboat is about.
Yeah.
You said something very beautiful, at the beginning of the conversation. And I held it back because I didn't want to ask till we come to the right moment. You made a statement saying that not everyone should or can be an entrepreneur, and there is no harm to it. So why it's beautiful? Because our chapters of Lifeboat comprises of entrepreneurs, it comprises of investors,
Yeah.
it comprises of intrapreneurs.
Yeah.
And why entrepreneurs? Because they become an equally important part, because their story and their thought process is that a job is also fantastic. They have done tremendously well, they are super successful, they're very well known, but they are in a job and
Yeah.
they're very, very happy.
Yeah.
Why I ask and why I say it's so powerful and so beautiful what you said, Naiyya, is because today, unfortunately, entrepreneurship is glamorized. Lot of reasons. बहुत सारा PR आ गया है, बहुत सारे platforms आ गए हैं, बहुत सारे episodes आ गए हैं. So people see the beautiful glamour quotient, the wow factor, and they're like, oh my God, this is the reason we want to be an entrepreneur, because it's a shortcut to fame. Hakikat kuch aur hai. And people don't realize the amount of blood, sweat and tears that one goes through to reach that zone. And I say this in my style, and I've said this a couple of times, कि एक entrepreneur एक कील है. And you will resonate a lot because there's such beautiful amount of art in your house. कि दा उम्र भर वो कील बोझ उठाता रहा. दा उम्र भर वो कील बोझ उठाता रहा, और ये कमबख्त दुनिया जो है उस तस्वीर की वाह वाह करके निकल गई.
Wow.
So जो दिखता है सिर्फ वही
Beautiful.
दिखता है, but no one sees behind.
We should have a whole episode of you just like reciting your shairis. Huh?
There are
It's
too many
beautiful.
of them, then we'll get a little shairana andaz. Guys, अभी हमारे पास fancy
It
chair
मेरे
इसलिए
सोने के
है.
साथ भी होने वाला है. Because anyway it's broken. I mean, Arya's been jumping on it.
But I want to now come to this mindset, and I want you to give some learning, some reasons, some thoughts to our viewers to say, why is it okay not to be an entrepreneur? Why is it okay to do what you're doing and do it so well that you can be equally happy, equally successful? So when I say that, I mean, if I have to take and ask you 2-3 such instances or learnings where you would say that the fragilest of moments, where the most resilient of people can break, because entrepreneurship makes that out of you, so that people understand the value not just about entrepreneurship but also about entrepreneurship, also about a job, also about, because यार हर कोई entrepreneur बनेगा तो यार टीम कैसे बनेगा, काम कैसे आगे बढ़ेगा. It's two sides of the coin, and both are equally important. So take us through that.
No, so I mean, Vinayak, the reason I say not everybody needs to or should be an entrepreneur is because, I mean, it's such a, it's a personality trait as well, right? I mean, today I was actually speaking at a session a couple of days back, and the question was asked is, what advice would you give to some of the people in this room if they want to be entrepreneurs? And the first thing I said was, introspect deeply. And introspect deeply on a couple of things. Introspect deeply on what stage in your life are you at, right? Are you ready to, give like your 12, 18 hours a day to building something grounds up? The effort, the rigor it takes, right, is a different beast altogether. Secondly, financially, what stage of your life are you at, right? Because while we are all, and I'm a big believer, now of like really profitable cash-rich companies, it takes time for these to nurture to that level, right? So financially, are you at a stage where you can afford to take that bet? And thirdly, what's that ecosystem you have around you of support and care and security in some sense, right? Because again, you go through so much up and down as an entrepreneur. If that ecosystem around you is fragile today, right, or is not accepting of that choice, or upar say they're accepting, but when really they see you having to put in those hours, that time or that energy, and not going for family vacations, honestly, not having friends anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
You're like a pariah.
Yeah.
I remember I got stopped calling out on parties or anything else, saying, "Yeah, tu to kabhi aayega hi nahi."
Correct. It's only like I said, the last 3 months I've been sleeping. The last 3 months I've actually been able to, I would say, resuscitate my friendships with friends outside the entrepreneurial network that were honestly on ventilator, right? So that's the third thing, right? I mean, are you okay with that? And I'm not trying to again glamorize it, because in the suffering also there's a lot of glamour.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to glamorize it. That is real. And also, of course, there are companies that are built long-term, sustainably.
You said something so beautiful, and I want to outline this. There is glamour in suffering in hindsight.
Yeah.
There is never glamour in suffering when you're suffering at that process, and people don't realize that.
Correct. But outside in, then you look at these stories, like I'll tell you the story of, oh, my knees buckled, and like, oh, wow, what a story.
But what they don't realize is, you are able to say this today.
Yeah.
What they need to realize is how your emotion would have been at that point of time.
Yeah.
And are you strong enough to take that?
Yeah. And I don't know whether I was strong enough or not. I just know that I was resilient enough to bounce back, right? And I think that is, anyway, so I think,
that's the Rocky philosophy.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, by the way, Rocky's one of my favorite movies.
So I want to show you like it. That's the Rocky philosophy.
It's not how hard you hit, but how far, yeah.
It's how quickly you can bounce back and how far you can go after getting hit.
Correct. So anyway, I think it's a set of very practical choices and a very deep introspection and a conversation with yourself and your loved ones on whether this is the right time for you. I think the second thing to it is that, there's a lot. I mean, I really credit my time at McKinsey with teaching me a lot of things. The culture at McKinsey and is incredible, Vinayak. And I'm so grateful I was exposed to it growing up, right? What was it about? McKinsey globally, आप किसी को भी मिलो, कहीं से भी McKinsey का कोई भी बताया बंदी हो, right? You know they're from McKinsey because there's collaboration, there's a pursuit of excellence inbuilt in them, teamwork is given, right? And non-hierarchical in nature. I think these, and of course, like a very, regardless of what the press tells you, but for most part, very strong sense of ethics, okay? So I think these are the things that define the McKinsey experience for me.
Right.
So, I mean, broadly summarizing, I think, when you're, I actually tell a lot of younger folk that there is absolutely a lot of value in working with corporates and working with scale startups because you get a benchmark at least, right, for what processes could look like, structures that support scale and agility at scale could look like in successful companies and startups. And of course, I think, having structured processes to being a coach, to being a mentor to your teams, I think it's a very important part of just learning how to be an entrepreneur. Yeah? I mean, because you're not going to be building a small company, you're going to be building very large entities. And how do you build the skill set to actually, address the needs of what a large organizational structure requires from you? You need to have seen some of those experiences firsthand. Everything can't be learned on the job.
True. And at times you may not even need to take that plunge, right? You may be very good doing what you're doing.
Correct. 100%.
Stay there, build there, and have a fantastic career.
Make your wealth there as well. I mean, right now, the good thing is that corporate India is actually also, in many cases, a very lucrative option for people. I mean, you mentioned
not compared to entrepreneurship, where we are.
But I think we talk about the stories of the successes in entrepreneurship. If you look at the general successes or well done journeys in corporate India, they probably made a lot more money on an average, right, than let's say a lot of the entrepreneurs who try to become entrepreneurs, right?
Absolutely. So I think the ratio is 1:100, 1:100 in terms of success. Easily. When you now see yourself in a much larger frame, you see more shoulders to share the burden with. How's mindset there? How's for a lot of our viewers to be able to understand that a merger is not just a merger because of the circumstance and the need. A merger is also a merger to go across and exponentially grow in resources, to be able to build and do things in a far deeper and a far more impactful manner than what individually one could. And that maturity to also factor in suddenly a less lonelier journey, if I may say so.
Yeah.
Because you have maybe 2-3 more shoulders, 2-3 more bodies to go across and bear the bullets together with. How's that?
So, I mean, let me just sort of break it down into a timeline, right, Vinayak? So, when I joined I joined My Glamm actually. So, my employment agreement says co-founder and president My Glamm, right? So, there were 3 companies. There was My Glamm, there was BabyChakra, there was PopX. So, there were 3 founders. There are 3 founders, Darpan, Priyanka and I. And I think the first 6 months was about just kind of, to your point, right? Recalibrating that now this is a journey that 3 people are taking together, 3 companies at that point in time are taking together, right? The vision, the mission is much larger. And it's not only about now watching out in some sense for BabyChakra, it's about now understanding there's a whole set of different teams, different stakeholders involved. Some of them are set in the ways they do things, right? You have to learn their ways, you have to learn different culture, right? So I think it took me 6 months to even adjust to the overall scheme of things. And you know,
and at that point of time to also keep your mind open to adjustment.
Correct.
That also is so important.
Correct.
Because it's more about unlearning than learning in a situation like that.
Absolutely. And you know, that's when I realized, and that is I think the first lesson I had as an entrepreneur, the first time I had that lesson, which is sometimes you need to go slow to go fast. Yeah. And that's why, you know, we talked about that speed and hustle, and that's when I think I really learned the power of being slow sometimes, right? Because then you set a very robust route and a structure and a base on which you can catapult later. That was one.
Like it's like a friend of mine says, right? You can't have a 40-kilometer sprint.
Yeah.
You can have a 40-kilometer marathon.
Correct. And well said. And I think I know who you're talking about. The second thing I think I learned was, you know, when you're part of a much larger team and there's a lot of collaboration that is needed and it's not natural to the system initially on, right? How do you deal with different incentives and different stakeholders, especially when all the incentives may not be aligned to the outcome that you're gunning towards, right? So there's a lot of, I think, soft power, soft relationship building that you have to build in that journey. And, you know, many times it's all about, oh, there's that person, how do you get most people to report to you? But that's never the answer. You know, that's one of the easiest answers you can arrive at, but that's not the answer when you're working in scaled organizations.
And that way you'll never reach the North Star.
You will never reach a North Star, right? So I think that's the second thing I really learned and relearned, right? Because so far, I mean, I had everybody reporting into me, right? And suddenly there were different teams with different motivations, different incentives, different bosses, right? The third thing I learned was about, you know, leadership and about org structure. So till then, you know, I actually said this in another conversation recently, which is I learned that as a leader, please don't delegate. Certainly don't micromanage. People say then delegate. No, create new leaders. Delegation in my head is actually that what you do, what your vision is, what actions you would take, you're passing it on to someone else to do. And then in a way, that's actually micromanagement, right? Because you're just delegating what you would not naturally
have done. It's like a pass-through.
It's a pass-through.
As against creating a new leader and going across and seeing how that person reacts to the thing.
And I think that is the big learning I've had over the last 2 years, which is how do you create new leaders and then trust them to run with it. You know, so before that, I mean, of course, I was creating some leaders, right? But now my approach is that can they build it out? So you hire someone and you say, can I trust you to completely build it out? Also,
the canvas is way broader.
It is. And I'm not the expert in many things today. No one can be.
So again, goes back to acceptance.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I have. So I think I have accepted a lot.
The power of acceptance is underestimated, Naiyya. So many people don't understand that when you acknowledge and accept that there is X that you can do, but X plus Y plus Z that 3 of you or 4 of you can do together, the magnification is crazy.
Yeah. No, and I think I love what you said. In fact, maybe I'm going to introspect a little bit more on this term acceptance later, you know, because, and that's something you leave me with. Because you're right, I think I learned to accept, and over time I found the joy in the acceptance and my personal development in that acceptance.
Absolutely. There's one more thing, you know, which I derive out of your learnings, which while you've not, you know, explicitly stated it, but my job is to always articulate things that I understand. And this is something that within my co-founders at Vertices, we believe in this philosophy very strongly. Like all 4 of us are very different, diametrically different of each other. And you know Archana well. You don't know the others, but we're very, very different in terms. Yet we're very eerily similar. But there is this concept that we believe in, and where we call it that you are supposed to be different with each other. If you're identical, that's actually problematic.
Correct.
But where is the magic mantra? The magic mantra lies in celebrating the differences, not making issues out of the differences.
Correct.
And I think another thing what I beautifully hear from you is that because of the broader canvas and the broader aim and the broader picture, you're also celebrating your differences and bringing across strength material together for everyone.
Absolutely. And beautifully said. And by the way, on that point, I actually give Darpan a lot of credit, because you know, he really has, I think, also helped us all and each play to our strengths, right? And
he's a very interesting guy. I remember meeting Darpan when I was Tano's counsel long time ago, when it was a services business that he used to run.
Yeah, and he's gone through his own journey, right? The ups and downs are very clear to see for everybody. So anyways, I give the ability for all of us to very powerfully and very confidently play to our strengths. I attribute a lot of that to Darpan, because otherwise, you know, you could be in a situation where you'd have you're managing two new co-founders in the system as well. It's not easy.
You have to have that one person as the guiding force, the guiding light.
And the binding force,
and the
more
binding
importantly.
force, and the binding force.
Right, because I think over times we've all sort of guided each other maybe through this journey, but the binding force has been him.
The nucleus has to be there.
Correct.
I completely resonate with it.
Yeah.
Motherhood. Or I would like to say parenthood, because it changes the game. Why parenthood? Because, you know, as fathers, we are always given the shorter end of the stick of the parenthood.
But it's a transformational experience.
But it's a journey that we participate also as.
A lifelong journey, yeah.
You and Sandeep are recent parents.
Yeah.
Archana and I are recent parents. Our children are almost literally similarly aged. We've gone through a lot of our journeys during the time of parenthood. We've seen how that has evolved us as human beings. And our journeys, our thought processes, and a lot of things have changed. I personally believe that parenthood completely changes the game in terms of your mind space. Especially as a founder when you're building something. At times, parenthood brings in that essence of calm, that power of slow that you're talking about, to appreciate the power of slow. The power of far more empathy, far more acceptance, tolerance, various things, right? It's inbuilt into it. Some of our viewers might be in that age group where they're about to be parents, you know, 28, 30, 32, 33 people generally are in that zone where they're getting into that mindset, or perhaps within that range of being a parent, but yet at the same time building something. And it's such a scary feeling, especially for women, right? Where you're a mother and you have a venture, you have to ensure that you manage both together.
I mean, the buck stops with you as a leader, yeah.
And there is a huge essence of guilt on both sides. Who do you give more attention to? Who do you give less attention to? Especially when the child is growing up. And you have a child's accountability, you have a team's accountability. There's so many emotions. How does motherhood, or how has motherhood changed you? What's your advice as a mother who's raising a beautiful child? I think Arya is going to turn out to be a lovely angel. Who's built a good business, who's building it even further, and you're doing both things beautifully parallelly. Take us through that mindset and some learnings around that.
Honestly, I've never felt any guilt. You know, I genuinely have not, because
and that's a very powerful thing to say.
No, and I genuinely have not. And you know, I do the mompreneur podcast on the side, which is with like successful entrepreneurs who are mothers. And of course, every mother has, and every entrepreneur has had their own journey, right? And I know many mothers and fathers who've faced the guilt and dealt with the guilt. I haven't had any guilt, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you another flip side to this as well, right? I haven't had guilt because I know that if I'm not happy, and if I look back at my life, let's say 40, 50, 60 years from now, and if I haven't achieved my potential for myself, right, I will never be able to be happy, and I will never be able to pass on that happiness to my daughter, right? So for me, it's always, and I grew up in a household where my mum was working, very ambitious, very driven. So for me, it was always very normal to be a ambitious, working woman and a mother. So I've not felt the guilt. However, I have felt, and this happened to me when I found out I was pregnant. I remember coming out of the loo, to put it bluntly. And
with the kids.
With the kit. and finding out I was pregnant, and Sandeep was sitting, this is again our old house, and I said, you know what, we're pregnant. And he jumped on the bed and he was like, yay! And I started crying. And I broke down and I was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. He's like, what do you mean it's a disaster? It's like, what will I tell my board? What will I tell my shareholders? What will I tell my team? Will they take me seriously? I'm a single founder. Now I'm pregnant. Will they take me? And I'm running BabyChakra, okay? It's supposed to be amazing for business. So I've shared the story before, but I want to just emphasize it for someone who's watching it for the first time to know that even in our own heads, there are these biases, right? And
self-driven prejudices.
Self-driven prejudices. And what was so beautiful was after that, when I told my team and I told my board and I told our, we were doing a lot of branded deals. I told our main customers, right? They all were thrilled. For them, it was normal because they were like, Naiyya, we know you. You're so driven. You're so ambitious. Nothing's going to change in BabyChakra. You have an amazing top team, right? Even try to take a mat break or whatever you do, the business will continue as usual. And set up the processes if necessary. Now, of course, in my head again, my own demons, right? So I came back after literally I think 3 weeks after I gave birth, I had a C-section. I was hobbling back into office, not recommended. But that was my journey, right? So I think when I look back, for anybody who's listening in right now, I mean, the world has changed. We need to evolve with the world now.
Yeah.
So that's one big part of, I think, just a message I want to leave with everybody. And I think now when I'm so grateful for Arya. She gives me so much joy. She, and just being with her is like I'm learning every day.
Kids are everything, man.
They're everything, now. So, I mean, it's like
I've changed completely.
Yeah. Tell us more then about that.
That's on a separate episode.
Episode.
Yeah, but I used to enter a room and generally be the one eating everyone up. I think I'm far calmer, far nicer. I don't intimidate anymore. As in I do, but lesser. Yeah. But yeah, kids are everything. They ground you. They make you realize the value of tomorrow. They make you realize the value of sustainable long-term thought processes.
Long-term, certainly. Yeah.
The
play long game comes when you have a child.
You need to be around, right?
Correct.
So, you said something very beautiful while you were talking about this. You mentioned about top-notch team as the L1s and the L2s. I want to ask you a very interesting question, something that a lot of founders dabble with and they find it as a huge challenge. So in my life, one of the biggest learnings has been about the most obvious is always the least obvious. Why do I say that? And I'll give you an example. So I remember I was talking in some forum, maybe TED or Josh or some other place, I don't know, large gathering was there. And somebody asked me a very interesting question and they said, Vinayak, you've hopefully changed the game of a legal entrepreneur. Yeah, you're a little different compared to how old school law was. Right?
Definitely, yeah.
And you're creating a following, you're creating a little bit of influence, you're doing things differently. You built a beautiful business, it's successful, somewhat autopilot. You've got some fantastic team members. Can you give us the USP, the magic mantra of building a successful business? So I smiled. I said, it's very easy. Magic mantras are very easy in life. It's actually very simplified. So he said, tell me how. So I said, you have a pen and a paper? He said, yeah. I said, do one thing. Break it down into columns and write about the first 5 things that I'm telling you. Your most obvious support system. So beyond friends, families and fools, who's always going to be there for you. Your most obvious team members, who you know will go across and take the plunge with you no matter what. Your most obvious customers and clientels, who will always be there with you. Your most obvious friends, family and fools, which is beyond your support system, which means they will also be there and they'll put in the first money, the first check, whatever. And your most obvious cheerleaders, because you also need intangible cheerleaders, that shoulder to say, ho jayega. Once you have all of that, you create a business plan basis that, cash flow, year 1, year 2, year 3, and you know there's a business plan. And that's how you create the business to build a business. So you said, okay. I said, that's very easy, that's what you have to do. He looked a little disappointed. I said, okay. He's sitting down. I said, don't sit. I said, you have that paper with you? I said, yeah. I said, written down all of those most obvious, most obvious, most obvious, most obvious. I said, yeah. I said, take that paper, fold it again, tear it, throw it. So your most obvious friends, families, fools have gone, most obvious clients have gone, most obvious teams have gone, most obvious cheerleaders are gone. Everything that you thought was most obvious is gone. Can you still build? Can you still say you'll be able to take the plunge? then you still have the mental capacity to say you'll create. If you have that, then go across. One of the things that came across of that was, personally, I saw a lot of people who were supposed to be in a journey in a ship not be there when they saw the first signs of the storm.
Yeah.
How does one ensure as a founder to build that right cohort of people, your right cohort of L1s, who will be there, come what may? Very difficult to say again that they will be there throughout, but at least the culture, the way that you can build to say that these people will continue. You've built a beautiful institution. A lot of them have moved on and continued with you in the new frame as well. You've seen vintage with these people. For our viewers who are dabbling with the right hires, how to make the right hires, or maybe some of our viewers are going to be the potential L1 in a company. Maybe for all you know, a potential viewer might be a potential employee at your end. What are those key learnings for Naiyya to create that perfect L1? What do you look at during hiring? What are the green flags and what are the red flags?
So, see, I mean, I genuinely believe in leading with trust. For me, it's like, and there's such a trust deficit in the country that I think people just find it actually a privilege to be trusted as much as, honestly, I trust them when they join the job or when they build with me, right? And I think that's a big moat that I'm able to create, right? And the reason I can trust people is because I believe there's also, it's a very robust process we have, right? Which is that in the hiring, right? So when you're doing the hiring itself, I mean, how do we hire, right? We do hiring through, of course, like your inbounds and your job calls, etc. But the interview process is very robust, right? So we'll do a lot of referral checks. I do a lot of referral calls with their previous employees or the employers or the previous team members, right? And not just the bosses, but equally the peers, to get a sense of their attitude, their culture, their ambition fit, right? Red flags, like, when you look at the CV and you see people switching jobs every 6 months, big red flag, not even shortlisted for an interview in my organization, right? If I have any say where I do. Because I don't believe that person's playing the long game. We get a lot of inbound references, by the way, from previous team members, alumni, if you will, and equally from fellow founders, right? And those get immediately, like, they cut the queue and they come up front, right? So I think the onboarding, the hiring process is very critical, right? And then, of course, when you come into an ecosystem where you come in and you're like, "Arey, itna trust hai system mein," then you have only two options. Either you mimic that norm and the cultural values, or you do something that is not setting the base for trust, and it's a very clear one strike and you're out rule in my teams on a high ethics or a trust matter.
Yeah, ethics should be
non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable.
And I don't. It's not always ethics.
I mean, like,
right?
not even one strike actually.
Yeah, I mean,
much before that.
Yeah, correct. And maybe like for me, it's like it really sets the tone, right? And the third thing I think is also, many times people talk about onboarding and then the engagement and, the values they see when they're part of a team. But people also observe how you let people go or how you ensure people transition well and what happens after. So and I think it's very important to respect people's choices and decisions. Not everybody is there with you for the full journey, and that's totally fine. And that comes with maturity and acceptance. It's sometimes I have sleepless nights. I'm like, how can this person leave me, But it's time. I mean, I've matured, right? I've understood people have their own journeys.
And everyone has a chapter in a book.
Absolutely, right? And you let them go with grace, with full dignity, with celebrations. And then they become ambassadors for you in whatever context that they operate in. And I think that is the
other... That is so powerful, what you're saying.
And that signaling to the existing team members is super critical. Right? And that also fosters going back in the middle and really fosters trust that, people actually discuss with me if they're considering other job offers, which is a real place of privilege, if you ask me, right? Because and unfortunately, that is the moat that you're building with. Because for me, it's normal because I've seen that at McKinsey. I've seen that in an HBS context and in those organizations, right? But in India, for some reason, that's not the norm. So it actually becomes a moat in a hiring process and
Very
like
powerful.
retention process.
Very powerful. Because a lot of times what happens, the moment someone puts in the notice period, somehow the mindset becomes negative towards the person, and that's one of the worst things to do.
And it's so silly, it's so amateur.
Like, we have a philosophy, there have been so many instances where people have come and discussed, and then they've had that tentative view to say, they've put in the paper before the bonus announcement. And I'm like, it's got nothing to do with your past. Bonus is about your past. What you're doing is your future. It's a future decision that we are talking about, but you're absolutely eligible for what you're doing in the past.
Absolutely.
So for
and
us,
we have the same philosophy.
For us, that culture is everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So lead with trust.
Yeah. What are the absolute no-goes?
In hiring or in generally in team culture?
In hiring. For a lot of our founders who are in that process of hiring good people, what's your advice? What are the red flags that you've seen and has shaped out to be absolute cracks in the mirrors? And what would you advise that the moment someone sees these signs, beware?
See, I mean, some of the mistakes I've only made in life, right? And what are those mistakes? Sometimes you hire someone who's used to a hyper-skilled organization. You're putting them in a very small structure, right? And expecting them to deliver because you're like, oh, that person has experience and expertise. But it's different, right? And times have changed, context has changed. That person's not probably going to be able to manage something with the agility, the speed, or even the innovation frugality that a certain context requires. And vice versa, by the way. I mean, you know, to expect that all my team members who are used to working in a certain small, very high culture, scaling to a very different level immediately, it's not possible. It's not always possible, right? So those are mistakes I take full accountability for. I've also learned along the way on that. The second, as I mentioned, is I think people who don't play the long game. You know, and I tell everybody in my team that, you know, you like think of yourself as your own personal brand, right? So if someone says, what does Naiyya stand for? What does Vinayak stand for? What does Karan stand for, right? You immediately think about 2 or 3 adjectives, correct? And that is what is the thing that you need to think about in every action and every interaction that you have as an individual, as a professional.
True.
And I think that has changed the game a lot for people who would otherwise be bad actors. Yeah. Because the minute you keep on emphasizing, you know, you are your own personal brand, they're like, but I can't, like, you know, because your reputation continues with you and you just don't know how life.
But that's also a sense of maturity, to understand the long haul, to understand the fact that the long game is a completely different.
Correct.
You know, it catapults you to a different level.
Correct. But, you know, I think a lot of times people don't realize that this long game is not just something that happens like 10 years later. Yeah. It's actually like something that happens 6 months later because these stories travel and reputation travels, right? So I think that's the other piece, you know, like.
What about the I over we syndrome? A lot of times, and especially at startups, we face this problem, right? Where you hire a rock star because you believe that it's he or she is a rock star. And it turns out the rock star is just he or she in an individual frame. And it's always about putting himself or herself above the entire company or the entire broader plan. So it's I over we. Whereas in a startup or any good culture, it has to be a we over I. It has to be us together.
Correct.
There are 2 schools of thoughts in this. Some founders have actually turned around and said that maybe that I also is okay momentarily because it allows that person to come with that crazy momentum and he or she takes a lot of people along in that momentum. Some people have said that in the long run, while immediately there's a rush and there's an immediate delta or a spike, in the long run that actually comes across to be a far deeper valley. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think it's very case by case specific, honestly. You know, I don't want to put a generalization to it, and I'll tell you why. See, some roles necessarily require you to go very, very deep, right? And there is actually no scope for that being a democratic decision. You know, you don't need collaboration everywhere. I mean, like some of my best engineers, right, have not been people who've tried to make the safe choices, the most democratic choices, because they may not be the right choices for the business or for the stack that we are building out, right?
But that is case in point in terms of the situation. I'm talking about the person putting himself or herself above the institution.
No, that's a separate.
That's why I owe we.
Correct. No, and that's fair. I mean, I was looking at we as a more democratic decision-making process.
That I agree with you, because at times the situation demands an immediate action. You can't wait across for a democratic
Absolutely,
process.
And you can't also. I mean, sometimes you might have more expertise than the person who's trying to like.
And you have to respect that.
Yeah, correct. I mean, I honestly haven't found too many people who are the I over the institution, because I mean, what would that even take on the format of? I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, unless someone is like, I mean, what would that be? I don't even know.
Oh, lots of things, yeah.
Like such as what?
Like someone who comes in as a super sales star and says that I can go across and create an immediate impact on the bottom line, and he doesn't give a damn about what the philosophies of sale have been in that organization, because he comes from a particular background where he's done X, Y, Z much larger numbers, and he says this is how we need to move, and that might actually have a cultural shift in the organization.
I don't think it's a bad thing, as long as, I mean, you're doing things ethically, you're doing things the right way, and you're able to.
But will it sustain long term according to you?
So I don't know, again, it's very case by case piece, right? I mean, I actually think it's important to bring in a freshness of thinking. If it's not, I mean, if it's changing the way business is done, maybe it's a shift for the better in case it's getting a better outcome. But of course, if you're doing things in a way which is wrong, unethical,
that is not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. Where, I mean, like, so I think it totally depends.
So
case
what
by
you're
case.
saying is also that you test it out. Be tolerant as a founder.
Yeah, you just
don't
lead
take
with
a
trust,
reactive.
no?
Yeah.
You lead with trust.
Don't
because-
take a reactive measure.
Correct.
Give the benefit of doubt.
No, I'll tell you why, Vinayak. More importantly, many times the founder confuses the institution with their philosophy. It's not the same. Then the founder is being the I over the we.
Yeah, and that is one of the toughest
Correct,
things to
and that's
separate
why
down.
I would really encourage founders to please take a step back and like look at an I over we and say, is the we in this particular case
Not I.
not I?
Yeah, that's very powerful.
Yeah. So I think this I over we is very contextual, and I've seen too many founders feel threatened or feel like, oh my God, how can this person come and rock the boat? And leadership teams feeling like, oh, this person's coming and rocking the boat and not being collaborative. And the answer, and that's when leadership teams and founders need to really take a step back and say, who's the real I here and who's the real we here.
हर दिन कोई भसर होता है.
Arya?
Let's talk about one more thing which is really itching the ecosystem now and very sensitive.
Yeah.
Founder greed. Some instances, some situations which lead to questions on corporate governance,
Yeah.
which lead to questions across the ecosystem, which lead to a mindset shift and change in the investor community. And as a result, the entire ecosystem suffers. But greed is such a weird thing, Naiyya, right? Because it's so circumstantial, it's so immediate, it's so relevant and bespoke to that individual that you can't really have some set parameters to ye sahi hai, ye galat hai. Of course, ethics everyone knows.
Yeah.
But for young founders who are now building and for whom people like you are the people that they look up to say that यार इसने तो मचा दिया, इसने तो बहुत कुछ कर लिया, इसने तो यार इतना बड़ा acquisition में भी participate कर लिया. You and I have heard over the last couple of hours 2-3 mentions of the importance of the long haul game that you've outlined. What's your advice to manage greed for young founders? It's so difficult and yet so relevant that one small wrong decision impacts reputation of an individual for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Collateral damages across people around that person. My profession demands me to be amidst so many such situations which I'm advising either side. And I've seen the dirt, I've seen the muck. What's your take for young founders to manifest their being in such a manner that this particular angle or wrong lane does not come into the play?
I think there are 3 things I would leave here with them. One is don't hero worship anybody. I think in the startup ecosystem, there's a lot of hero worship, because this person is witty, this person makes certain statements, this person makes outrageous statements. Hero worship bahut hota hai.
Seriously.
Right? And I think it's so sad. I mean, I think it's really sad. We are all individuals. We are the main characters of our journey, right? We're building for a different purpose. So I think this hero worship is nonsense, right? So please don't hero worship anybody, including like if you think this conversation is inspiring, great, but take it at face value, filter it for what you want to take away from it, and know
what's
your
relevant to
journey
you.
is different. The second thing I would say is that when you look at life, right, and when you look at business building, there are no shortcuts. Many times people are like, "Arey, overnight, इतना पैसा उठा लिया, इतना वैल्यूएशन हो गया, इतना बड़ा सेकेंडरी हो गया इसका." शॉर्टकट्स नहीं है लाइफ में, एंड लाइक प्लीज इन दैट शॉर्टकट, लाइक दैट होल फोमो सेट्स इन, सो यू स्टार्ट लुकिंग एट कि मैं कैसे शॉर्टकट लूँ. Things like related party transactions without disclosing them, setting up like second shell companies where you're financing your wife, husband's family members to run events. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? There are no shortcuts. There are proper ways to build intergenerational wealth. Take those decisions, right? I think a third thing to this is that when you're building, right? Please know that every startup today, right, is representing brand India. I've written about this also. Even the most chota startup, right? There will be some angels, some rupee money going into it, some dollar money going into it. Each of us as entrepreneurs represent brand India. We have to understand that the startup ecosystem is extremely nascent still, very much in its infancy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, if you mess around with it right now, you are hurting yourself
And the entire
and
ecosystem.
shooting yourself in the foot. So I think these three things I would just like encourage people to think through, because I just find this herd mentality and it's extremely frustrating to see that, right? Also, by the way, I see a lot of celebration. I think that's changing now, but a lot of celebration of the more vanity stuff, right? Fundraising, you know, like the, you know, I mean, very frankly speaking also, right? I mean, about this person appearing on some shows. That's all, that's great. It gets conversations across. I mean, this is, you know, we're on this, it's getting a conversation across.
Yeah.
But this is not life. This is not building. This is part of it, one tiny
very
part
small
of it.
spectrum.
Yeah.
I guess that's the reason, you know, the genesis of Lifeboat comes a lot in terms of what you just stated last, because unfortunately glamour is directing mindset, and the worst thing that you can do is to get into a business because of glamour, because glamour is the most temporary, the most artificial, and the most, if I may even say, double-edged sword that you can think of, because by chasing glamour you may actually achieve it someday, but because the FOMO of that glamour can be so crazy that the means to achieve might completely land up to being wrong. And the moment that happens, the cause and effect, right? The effect of glamour is gone, because then you're not famous anymore, you're infamous. So
no, but people also thrive in infamy.
Which
so
is sad.
And they make careers out of infamy.
They do.
I mean, I'm just saying, I think there are like different kinds of personality types, and I think eventually that's.
But then they are not building anymore.
And that's okay, you know. But some people might still get swayed by that, and that's like, see, eventually it depends on who's making whatever choice they're making for their own lives, right? Some people thrive on being infamous, right? That's their call.
I'm hoping that I'm hoping that this kind of a content outlines people the reality of building.
Yeah, 100%.
And the
100%.
reality of building is that it's long term, it's clean, it's with depth, and it's for creating something which you're proud of at the end of the day.
Correct.
So there's a lot to it. This actually brings us to the penultimate section of our lovely chat, right? And this talks about what is the essence of Lifeboat in Naiyya's life. So let's talk a bit about that. You and I are friends, so I'm going to actually ask you also a personal question. Along with this, and I ask this because I believe, and I would like to believe, a lot of our viewers are also young advisors. A lot of them are in that zone where they're building their clientele, they're building that first relationship, whether they are lawyers, whether they're bankers, whether they're chartered accountants, they're different young professionals.
Yeah.
A lot of them,
consultants.
yeah, or consultants. And they're all wanting to build relationship where clients move to being friends, where this kind of a conversation, this kind of a relationship can be there.
Correct.
This kind of things can happen. So what's the power of having the right set of advisors around you? And when you accumulate all your thoughts around it, Naiyya, take us through your version of the Lifeboat.
So, I mean, I have so many, I think, stories to share, but I mean, I think the starting point, honestly, is, you know, just have those reservoirs of resilience within yourself to start off with, right? I mean, we've discussed this to some extent earlier, but I can't emphasize this enough. There will be times when the whole world, including your dearest, nearest, most well-meaning ones, will have a perspective on how you should approach things, but you know that you need to do it. So you need to first of all center yourself and build that reservoir of resilience and that reservoir of the direction of where you need to go for yourself. If you don't have that, everything I tell you later is not going to matter.
In Hindi Bhasha, there's a kahavat to this, suno sabka karo apna.
Haan, correct. Sahi baat hai. Correct, and I think that is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the second thing, right, is to have, I think, the people around you, right, because there's nothing else, right, that can be more critical. So there have been times when I've had, and you know, I'll tell you this, right, when I was going through my merger with my Glamm, there were a lot of very, very difficult shareholder conversations that obviously happened in a time like this, right, team conversations. And I remember like it was a pretty drawn out, like 6 to 7 month drawn out process minimum, right? Every morning at 7:30 a.m. and I was anyways awake because like I was not sleeping very many nights. One of my investors and also very dear friends, Karan Maheshwari, would call me and say, "Hi Naiyya, how are you doing?" Same tone, very chirpy, every morning 7:30 a.m. sharp. I never set an alarm. He would be the call. And he would just call in to check on me. And I can't tell you how much I appreciated that at that point in time.
That small little question, how are you doing?
How are you doing? So I would tell him, I would say, Karan, I'm okay. No, I don't think so. What's happening now? Right? And then we'd have that conversation. It would stretch out, right? And then I'd tell him what I'm facing as an issue today or yesterday that I faced, like till like 12 a.m. I've been on this call or I've been on this particular conversation with a team member. So I mean, yes, I think it's friends and advisors and sometimes investors, right? Who honestly have been my lifeboat in many, many, many circumstances. And I think the third lifeboat, listen, is family. And I shared this before, right? I mean, like through the whole process of building, there's just been such an intense journey. I don't know whether she was saying, I don't have as many friends left at some level, right? And sometimes, in the ecosystem as well, even with your very, very close entrepreneur friends, you don't want to tell them everything, right? So then
you can't.
You can't. So it's actually family, my husband, my parents, my sister, my mother-in-law, who's actually a very simple lady. But, she's just lent me a patient listening ear. And
sometimes that matters.
It just matters. And she's very spiritual. So she's prayed to God. And, it gives me that sense of comfort. Some divine intervention. Kavach aa gaya. Suraksha kavach, right? Like, some divine intervention will happen. So I think it's just like family and it really keeps you grounded. And I think it's super important because many times as entrepreneurs, there are like family is one of those, someone had talked about those glass balls you keep on juggling, right? Family is a glass ball, like hold it close, hold it tight, keep it protected always.
Because they protect you.
They protect you.
And this comes out across with so many people who've said this, that family is their ultimate lifeboat.
Yeah. And honestly, if you're lucky to have that family in place, right? Because I also know of many circumstances where families are not maybe the most encouraging and all, and that's sad. But then, then you go back to the first one, right? Which is anyways everybody's first one, which is your own reservoir of resilience.
I mean, mindset, end of the day for me, mindset is at par with family.
Yeah, correct.
How are you liking this, Naiyya? How's it been?
So we were discussing, right? I mean, I know Archana better than I knew you for many, many months, right? And I think Archana is amazing. And I think the thing, we of course bonded in the whole sort of mompreneur piece, the Ficky Flow piece that she's leading. And in her also, I found a very, very strong, entrepreneur who happens to be a mother. So a lot of I think resonance in our journeys too. And I think what has really beautifully turned out as a result of this is I've gotten to know Vinayak's backstory more than I knew before. And I think it's really special because if you're making me feel so comfortable in this, I was just telling you, right? I mean, like right now while we're chatting, I'm kind of forgetting that there are cameras and the lights all around us, right? I'm having a conversation with you.
And a pretty intense one.
A lot
of lovely cameras.
Pretty intense one. And I think it's pretty special that you can make us do that, like make me feel that, yeah? So, well done you, yeah?
No, I think for me, I keep pulling this one, there's so many friends who have become far closer friends of mine, even though they were introduced by Archana.
Why am I not surprised now?
and then we're like, oh, you know what? Too bad.
Yeah,
But yeah, she's an angel. And this brings us to the last segment, a very original segment by my team. It's called Lifeboat Shots.
Okay. Is it a rapid fire?
It is a rapid fire. That's why it's very original.
Is it one word?
It depends on you.
Okay,
That's,
thank God.
that liberty is
because
there.
Because these one-word rapid fires are pretty stressful.
They're a little stressful. We don't want to have anything which is stressful, but it's fun. Yeah, so
done.
I know Naiyya uses her brain and her heart together on most of the things. So in this case, we will want you to use more of your heart, less of your brain.
Okay.
It's fun. So I'm going to ask you the questions so that people get to see the fun side of you also.
Sure.
And they also know that there is a lighter side to you, which comes out very well through this. So, question number 1, Naiyya Saggi. If you could swap lives with a fictional character for a day, who would it be?
So, I won't, it's not a fictional character, but I would love to have been Agatha Christie. It's a pretty random thing, but
You have to change the question.
I had to change the question. Of course, I had to change the question. I'm sorry, but like, I think Agatha Christie's led a very, very fascinating life.
True. Some of her books and some of her stories.
Crazy. And the travels she had, the time she lived in.
I loved Hercule Poirot. Very, 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 very interesting. This is very interesting. What's the strangest food combination that you secretly enjoy?
I like food.
You're
nothing
Punjabi, you're supposed
yeah,
to like food.
I like food.
But what's something that you secretly enjoy? Crazy ass combination which no one knows.
I like Marmite and peanut butter. Marmite is a very acquired taste, so I picked it up. Yeah.
In continuation.
Oh, the other one. I eat a lot of green chilies. I like a lot of
love
green
green
chilies. I have like
chilies.
5 green chilies with every meal.
Yeah, I love green chili. I have actually a green chili achar also along with that.
Ah.
It's a very nice one. I'll send you some.
Please
You'll
do.
love it. In continuation, if you could have a lifetime supply of any one snack, what would it be?
Kurkure. Like, I'm crazy about kurkure.
Okay. What's your go-to dance move when no one's watching?
I can't dance very well. I lack hand-eye coordination, so I just like,
As long as you don't kill people.
yeah, no, I don't kill people. So I just do this.
All right, dude. What's the most embarrassing song on your playlist that you can't resist singing along to?
BTS, Boy with Love.
Okay.
You clearly don't know.
I clearly don't know. What's your guilty pleasure TV show or a movie that you're slightly embarrassed to admit you love?
Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
That I think. Okay, this one is one of my personal favorite ones. I've had such amazing answers across. If you could have one superpower for one day, what would it be?
To fly.
Why?
It's a feeling of freedom, liberation. There are no levels.
Which you could easily do by jumping out of the plane.
No, that's a different. That's not liberating at all. That's extremely stressful to think about.
What's the most adventurous thing that you've ever done, or what you would like to do?
I've done many adventurous things, travel alone very many places. But I think, like I told you, right, when we were training the judges of the Iraqi Special Tribunal, it was actually
I can
it
imagine.
was a security hazard. Like, we were in bulletproof cars, right? No one could know where we were going. It was a bomb-proof basement in a hotel. So I think for me, it was like a time when, while I was doing the workshop, my heart was going like,
And a different experience. I can't
totally
even
different
imagine.
experience.
Yeah. If you could meet your future self, what's the first question you would ask?
Are you happy?
Nice. I want to resolve this into another part which is not there, but one of my favorite questions in terms of this. If you had to give that one advice to your 15-year younger self, basis today, what would it be?
Stay happy, this too shall pass.
If you had a magic wand that could solve one issue in your life, which problem would you choose to fix?
Not generally in my life, but I would really, I think the income disparity is a big one. Yeah, I think it's not fair that some people have a very different journey of life just because they were born in a very different circumstance. I hate that. I think it's grotesquely unfair, and I would love to change that.
Create the equalizer.
Yeah.
I think
I'm
that's
not an equalizer. See, I'm fundamentally capitalist, but at least opportunities.
opportunity equalizer.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of democratization of knowledge does as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some way, maybe the knowledge out of these podcasts is going to create a lot of equalizers for a lot of future founders and future
Inshallah, God
entrepreneurs. All right, the last part, which we will hold you to. For Lifeboat Season 2, who would you like to invite?
So many amazing people. I mean, I
Name
think
one.
Suhasini Sampath.
Okay.
You should talk to her. She recently sold Yoga Bar to
Okay.
ITC, and I met up with her recently as well.
Is she a friend?
She's a friend. She's fantastic. Very, very honest. Very blunt.
Very nice.
I think a very, very cool person to have.
All right, so we shall hold you to it. That brings us to the last part of our segment. Again, a very, very original act for you to do. There is.
Is it actually an act I have to do?
There is a lifeboat cupboard that we have where all my beautiful friends, all my lovely friends who have come on this episode, they sign some beautiful stuff and keep it. I hedge it to say that the signatures are going to be really, really valuable a few years later, and I will auction each one of them and make that my pension fund. But on the serious note, this is a piece of my heart that stays in that. So please write something. How was it? Write something about the lifeboat and give us your thoughts.
Will do, but I have a request. Can I keep this mug?
Both of those are for you.
Okay, wonderful. Because one I want to give to my dad.
Yeah,
I
both of
mentioned
those
he
are
was
for
in the
you.
Ministry of Shipping, right? So this he will love.
Both are for you.
Okay, good.
All right, there you go. I've opened it for you.
Thank you. Sorry, my handwriting is terrible, but I'll read it out if you want.
No, don't worry, I will. I've seen far worse, and
Okay.
my handwriting is the lawyer's handwriting, so you can imagine. Here's to being the lifeboat to a million entrepreneurs. Absolutely, man. This is one of the best wishes that could be there. But thank you once again, Naiyya, for having me over, having the team over to you in your beautiful house. Thank you for giving us the most important commodity, which in today's time is the mind space, the calendar, the time that you invested in this conversation, and I hope you had fun.
What do you think?
You tell me.
I had a great time.
You've been
and
speaking in several places. How was this?
No, I love this, and I love. I mean, like I said, I love the fact that we actually just had a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. It was a conversation. It was an in-depth conversation. It felt like going back to college, by the way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place
Yeah,
to be.
yeah. It
Yeah.
felt like I was back in college and I was chatting with a college friend in like, you know, हमारा जो कोड होता था NLS में, right? वहाँ बैठकर late night तक बातें होती थी,
बकर होती
right?
थी।
हाँ, life की बातें, right? It felt like that. So thank you for making that happen in my house.
So lovely. And thank you for being a wonderful, wonderful guest. And I'm sure people will get to learn so much from your journey.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me over.
Thank you, Vinayak. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Naiyya.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Vinayak Burman. I hope आपको उतना ही मज़ा आया इस एपिसोड को देखने के लिए जितना मुझे आया इसको बनाने में. And if you think this adds value to your life, if you think this will teach you something, if you think this will help you to learn and create something in your lives, then go across and like, subscribe, share and comment. It will mean the whole world to me and my friends. If you don't have time to watch the entire podcast, then do subscribe to Vinayak Burman Clips and Vinayak Burman Shots, where we take out the most relevant extracts, the most important extracts of those podcasts, of those stories, of those moments for you and for your benefit, so that you can try and understand the gist of the whole conversation and yet take a lot of learning home. Signing off, Vinayak Burman.